Okay, so we are looking at the consequences of British Industrial Revolution, which are actually generally consequences, but the examples we take are from British. And within that, we have covered almost all of them, more than half of them. And right now, we're at social consequences. And within social consequences, we have seen urbanization, we have seen the class, new classes emerging and their context. Now we're looking at the family relationship, the marriages, the parenting, the woman gender role. Yes, this aspect is generally neglected in our answers. If you look at typical history optional books, they do not focus on this. However, if you look at sociology, anthropology, especially sociology, they focus a lot on this. उनका पूरा context ही ये है. Rather, the modern sociology emerged in the 19th century itself. That subject did not exist before. Auguste Comte is the father of sociology, and they are all the product of industrial revolution. तो सब्जेक्ट का जन्म ही इस प्रोसेस में होता है. तो दे फोकस अ लॉट on the social changes that are being carried out due to industrialization. So in our answer also, because of two things. Firstly, it is actually a very important impact. Secondly, there is a possibility of UPSC asking only purely a question on the social consequences of industrial revolution. We should be ready to write the answer. And in that, urbanization and class differences are not the only points. So we go for change in the family structure. यहाँ पे point is very simple. From the agrarian family, which was a traditional joint family, which used to work together on the farm. सारी की सारी family काम करती थी. अपने अपने roles होते थे. From there, you shift to cities. In the cities, you don't have a place to live. और जो जगह है कमरे बड़े, आज भी देखो दिल्ली में कितना महंगा रेंट है. आप सोचो आपके दादा को ले आओ, चाचा को ले आओ, रखोगे यहाँ पे? नहीं रखोगे, बहुत मुश्किल है, जगह ही महंगी है. तो बाय डिफॉल्ट द हाउसिंग प्रॉब्लम, द नेचर ऑफ वर्क चेंजिंग, all of these things led to nuclearization of family. That is the only thing. But if you want to add something to make your answer look little different, to add some historians and sociologists, for example, you can talk of E.P. Thompson. E.P. Thompson is the not David Thompson, ये दूसरा historian है, E.P. Thompson, but very relevant over here, who talks about the dissolution of rural communities. But apart from dissolution of rural communities, if you want to specifically come to the family cohesion issue, you have Stephen King. He talks about the similar thing from the family viewpoint. Separation profoundly impacted family cohesion. You can nuclear family का जन्म होता है. Nuclear family never ever existed in the history of agricultural society. The second thing is about the gender role. Now here, there are mutually contradictory responses. One response is liberating, other response is more and more constraining. Liberating response is very easy. I have given one example of Patricia Branca. You can give any other example, or you can not give. कोई जरूरत नहीं, आप नाम ना लिखो, कोई दिक्कत नहीं है. It's not a big point. The point is the one that is being told that it challenged the traditional gender norms कि फैक्ट्री में औरतें जाके काम करेगी. No, ऐसे नहीं कि औरत पहले काम नहीं करती थी. In the farm, in the cotton industry, she had a huge role to play. Spinning was primarily her role. Agriculture में जाके, farm में जाके cutting, the harvesting was also largely her role. So the women used to take participation in the production process even earlier, but it was kind of rather mostly unremunerated. Up she is going into factory as an employee. Rather women and children are preferred by factory owners क्योंकि इनको wage कम देना पड़ता है, इनको exploit करना बड़ा आसान होता है in that 19th century context. Nonetheless, it changed the gender roles and she got degree of economic independence. So it is a positive thing. Although under oppression, it is partly a positive thing, but this change did not happen the same way everywhere all the time. There is simultaneously also, especially in the middle classes, the rise of the norm of domesticity or cult of domesticity. What is respectable? इनकी औरत पर्दा लेके घर में रहती है. हम जमींदार की औरत शादी करते घर के आती है, बाहर काम नहीं करती, हम इज्जत वाले हैं. ये जो दिमाग में होता है ना कुछ लोगों के, that is also you see कि once you reach middle class, हम अब स्टेबल हो गए, हमारे पास इनकम है, मतलब क्या हमारे और घर बैठेगी, काम नहीं करेगी. As if her income is secondary. as if she goes to work only for the income and not for independence from the family. तो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट चीज है समझने की कि विद द rise of little bit of prosperity, you gradually see increasing cult of domesticity where women are not allowed to work outside. ये पैसे आ गए हैं, we are middle class, अब घर बैठो घूंघट लेके सेवा करो. I was stunned very recently. Actually, last week only I met a guy here who was a divorcee, and the reason of his divorce was that he thought that he is marrying and bringing a wife into home so that she can serve his parents. And if she is not able to serve the parents completely, तो divorce हो जाए. तेरा काम ही उनकी सेवा करना. हो सकता है करे ना करे अलग बात है, but the expectation is so rigid that that is the only purpose of marriage. तो फिर वो complications होने लाजमी होना ही है. But anyway, so we have the reinforcement of gender roles also and challenging of gender roles also. दोनों होता है because of industrial revolution. ठीक है. So it's a complicated response. And then it also influences the marriage patterns. Marriage patterns. अब शहर में जाओगे जैसे अभी भी आपकी उम्र क्या होगी, किसी की 25, किसी की 22, किसी की 30. So marriageable age used to be quite earlier. By 16, 17, 18 you used to get married. Now the marriage is getting extended for us because of UPSC preparation attempts, right? But that is again the outcome of industrialization. जब तक घर नहीं होगा खुद का तो लड़की कैसे शादी करने मिलेगी, जब तक एक सिक्योर इनकम नहीं है, जॉब नहीं है. तो ये हाउसिंग, सिक्योर एम्प्लॉयमेंट इश्यूज, ऑल ऑफ देम इमर्ज इन इंडस्ट्रियलाइज. हम भी कई बार गर्लफ्रेंड होती शादी नहीं करते 4 साल. सीधी बात है ना, क्यों? इनकम नहीं. तो ये एक्सपेक्टेशन, जो सेल्फ एक्सपेक्टेशन भी जो है ऑन द पार्ट ऑफ मेन that I need to be somebody to get married, that also is the outcome of industrial revolution. But anyway, I will not go into those aspects here, but the point is the marriageable age got delayed gradually because of urbanization and job issues. And then we have parents going on work all the time, children being reared either by the grandparents if it is a joint family, or by the neighborhood, or by their own. गली में घूमते हैं हाँ बच्चे. It takes a neighborhood to raise a child, ये कहा जाता है, but in negative sense because the parents are not there. वो तो काम पे लगे हुए हैं. Point is child rearing practices, the parenting practices also evolved because of this. क्योंकि एक होता है something called as attachment. In psychology, we use the word attachment. जितना समय parents बचपन से साथ देंगे, they create a secure emotional bond. There is secure attachment, insecure attachment, etc. Attachment got affected. Even this year, UPSC asked the question in, I think, GS1 society expert. अब mobile phones and devices की वजह से how the parenting is evolving. समय तो है नहीं तो हाथ में mobile phone थमा दो. Attachment is changing. So similar thing. Now you have Supreme Court saying कि there should be a place. अगर आपके कंपनी में कम से कम इतने employees है, तो as per labor law, you have to give maternity leave, you have to have creche facility. पहले नहीं था. You tell me in this entire ORM, there are so many institutes, कुछ बड़े हैं, कुछ medium, कुछ छोटे हैं. Let us say जो बड़े हैं, they have enough employees. And how many women workers are there? How many teachers you know in this industry are women teachers? 10. Hardly 1/10. Don't you feel something wrong is going here? Patriarchy is operational. Hardly 1/10 teachers are women teachers in ORM, despite it being the UPSC जहाँ पे लोग पढ़ लिख के आते हैं सारे. It's अब देखो ये किसी एक की गलती नहीं होती है, ये सिस्टमिक फ्लॉ है. I'm telling you one more. देखो क्या होता है ना, there are certain works which were done by women earlier. The moment you have industrial revolution, those works get mechanized, they get skilled, they get paid. Then the work is taken away from woman and man takes the work. उसको कोई वहां परेशानी, जैसे घर में बताओ खाना बनाओ, मैं खाना बनाऊं, होटल के शेफ कौन होते हैं? लगभग लार्ज नंबर ऑफ मेन. क्यों? क्योंकि पैसा मिलता है. तो जो काम घर में नहीं करना चाहते थे वो आप बाहर करने को तैयार हो. यही बात है ना. और यू टेक हार्वेस्टिंग. हार्वेस्टिंग वो फिजिकली लेबोरियस वर्क जो औरत खुद करती थी. जो इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन आता है, मैकेनाइजेशन होता है, हार्वेस्टर चलाने वाले कौन है? Usually men. So we have mechanization leading to defeminization of many economic roles. That also is a consequence of industrial revolution. But anyway, तो इसमें हम अंदर जाते ही रहेंगे, कोई point नहीं है. So let us come back. You have religion also. Not only family and marriage and all the practices, even religion gets evolved. For example, जब आप शहर में आते हो, यू आर अ लोअर क्लास पर्सन, मजदूर हो, दिन भर आपने कमर तोड़ मेहनत करी है, शाम को घर आके आपको क्या चाहिए? यू हैव इफ्यूजन ऑफ इमोशंस, पेंट अप इमोशंस, जिनको आपको बस निकालना है. तो क्या करते? भजन कीर्तन. ये इट्स अ वेरी नेचुरल ह्यूमन टेंडेंसी टू, क्योंकि वहां पे इन भक्ति मूवमेंट आपके इमोशंस इतने ऊपर चले जाते हैं कि वो फिर आप शांत हो जाते हैं. इट्स अ वेरी नॉर्मल थिंग. सो यू सी इन द अर्बन कम्युनिटीज जहाँ पे स्लम्स है, एक मंदिर होगा और वहां पे हमेशा कोई हरिपाठ चलता रहे, क्योंकि आपके पास कोई चारा नहीं है. शाम को आके एक तो भजन कीर्तन करोगे और यू वुड गो फॉर सम काइंड ऑफ फोक एंटरटेनमेंट, कोई गाना बजाना करोगे, and you will find lots of fantastically good singers and drum players among the worker class, fantastic musicians. We have even a different genre. I have the point later on in our cultural responses. Different genres of music start coming up, which are consumed by the urban worker class. Pura cultural pattern changes up. In religion also, because especially in religion, you have lost that गांव वाला हमारा बिरादरी का touch. Community is lost. You need to create alternative community for emotional security. So what do? You go for those new cults like Methodist cult here. Methodist was one of the Protestant church, Methodism. यहाँ पे the doctrines of Methodism focuses a lot on community. For आप संडे मास के लिए जाओगे, फिर वहां पे आपके दोस्त होंगे, आपकी बातें होंगी, बाइबल स्टडी ग्रुप्स होंगे. सो यू क्रिएट एन ऑल्टरनेटिव कम्युनिटी, भक्तों का समुदाय. तो रिलीजन ट्राइज टू फिल द इमोशनल वॉइड which is left because of migration to the cities and fragmentation of communities. You see that logic can be taken to next level with globalization. जब आज के दिन में बात करते हैं, why there is rise of right wing everywhere? Because in India also you have huge amount of urban migration in last couple of decades. हुआ है, हम 20% अर्बन थे, 30-35% अर्बन हो गए 20 साल में. बहुत बड़ी बात है कंसिडरिंग इंडिया साइज. यू आर क्रिएटिंग न्यू सिटीज, द ओल्ड विलेजेस आर डिसअपियरिंग. वहां से लोग, फिर फैमिली टूट रही है, बिरादरी खत्म हो रही है, आदमी को देयर इज नो कनेक्शन टू द सोसाइटी. हाउ डू यू फिल दैट गैप? विद बिकमिंग एक्सेसिवली रिलीजियस. तो बाबा कल्ट बढ़ रहे हैं. क्यों अलग अलग बाबा आ रहे इतने ज्यादा प्रमाण? to fill the emotional void that you have because of new kind of job and urbanization and fragmentation of community, everything. ये बढ़ने वाला, ये कम नहीं होगा. Whatever you say about secularism and rationality and everything, over next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, in the foreseeable future, this Baba cults, different Babas are going to come and they are going to be more popular. होगा ही होगा, जरूरत है. ठीक है, I'm not saying good or bad, it's just a fact of life. So you have Methodism also becoming one of the examples, Methodism becoming more popular among the worker class in England. And then you have cultural artistic responses as well. If UPSC asks a question on social responses, you can add this cultural response as part of social only. मैंने लिखने के लिए यहाँ पे अलग लिखा है, but it's a part of society. So new kind of culture, you can see the Industrial Revolution inspired various cultural responses, literature, art, music of the era, often reflected the challenges and contradictions. For example, the Romantic movement. We have seen the Romantic movement from the very beginning. अभी भी उसी era में है, 1820s, 1830s. It came after Enlightenment. The focus was on reaction against dehumanizing aspect, loss of nature, too much of machine work. Nature कहाँ पे है, emotions कहाँ पे है? So there you have, for example, William's Wordsworth. जब वर्ड्सवर्थ की पोएम आती है, और इवन ब्लेक, पोएम ऑफ ब्लेक. So ये सारी चीजें, focus on emotion and nature, is a kind of a reaction against excessive machine industry. Romantic poets from Wordsworth to John Keats expressed a sense of nostalgia towards nature. हमारे गांव में पर्वत था, नदी का झरना था, कुएं में हम उतरते थे तैरने के लिए। ये बातें अभी भी हम करते हैं। क्यों करते हैं? नॉस्टैल्जिया फॉर गाँव, सिंपल बात है। यात्रा होती थी साल में, कुल देवता होती थी। विद इन आपकी नेक्स्ट जनरेशन उसकी बात भी नहीं करेगी। आप होते रहोगे जिंदगी भर कि यार क्या हो गया। इट्स अ वेरी रियल सिचुएशन। बट इन then second aspect of culture is the emergence of something called as social novel. The novel जो आपका उपन्यास होता है उसमें कोई सोशल कंटेंट होगा, सोशल कमेंट्री होगी, सोशल सिचुएशन होगी। The most famous example is Charles Dickens. Hard times, and secondly, the one more thing, I think I have written over Oli. It is not Olivet. It should be Oliver. It Oliver Twist. T नहीं चाहिए, R चाहिए. Wrong spelling. Oliver Twist. You have Disraeli also writing Sybil himself. Disraeli himself. You have Thomas Hardy, which is the very famous novel of Thomas Hardy. Anybody? Far from the Madding Crowd. A very popular novel. Far from the Madding Crowd. Then you also have Thomas Carlyle, the historian himself. You have various people. It arose in England in 1830s as a reaction to the changes brought by Industrial Revolution. It was a means of commenting on abuses of government and industry and the suffering of the poor. It was पढ़ने वाला उपन्यास कौन है? जिनके पास थोड़ी आमदनी है, थोड़ा समय, थोड़ी सहूलियत है, वही तो पढ़ेगा उपन्यास, मिडिल क्लास पढ़ेगा। तो उनके सोशल कॉन्शियस को आपको अगर वार करना है तो तरीका क्या है? सोशल नॉलेज। So it is directed at changing the conscience of the middle class. Then you have architecture. It's a very small point. Now you have a crowding in cities. You have different needs of urbanization. So architecture will follow. For example, if you go to Mumbai, in old Mumbai, you had lots of textile mills. Mumbai mills ने बनाई है एक जमाने में. It was all labor class. हजारों लाखों लोग रहते थे, उसको हम मिल हैंड्स बोलते हैं, मिल मजदूर. We have entered communist movement coming out of Mumbai, Datta Samant and everybody. So look at their housing. They call it chawl, CHAWL, chawl. तो एक बड़ी सी बिल्डिंग होगी और कतार में एक एक कमरा बस हर एक का, और पूरे फ्लोर पे ग्रिल के डब्बे तरह के कमरे हैं, अंड में एक टॉयलेट है बस, और एक कमरे में 10 लोग रह रहे हैं. Such kind of chawl building never existed in India before. It is outcome of industrialization. How to fit in those many people, and they created a chawl community. We have lots of movies on that in Bollywood. But the point is that such kind of built-up environment in cities, new architecture emerged, which was the outcome of industrial. Industrial revolution made available different material for building, the steel. It changed the aesthetic sense of what is beautiful. Lots of new types of building came to appeal that aesthetic sense also. So दोनों तरफ से, on one side material availability and aesthetic sense, on the other side the functional requirement. Because of both of these things, the architecture started to change. Then you have sports. Football किसका गेम है? मजदूरों का गेम. Football is a typical lower class game, जहां पे आपका अग्रेशन, आपका गुस्सा निकल के आता है. Football riots are so common in England even today. Football riots. फुटबॉल की गेम कोई मैच हारता है, एक साइड जीतती है, एक साइड गुस्सा होती है, जला देगी गली पूरे, 10 दुकान जला दिए. नॉर्मल चीज है. इंग्लैंड इज 1960s, 1970s, 1990s, इट इज नोन फॉर दैट. अनएम्प्लॉयड यूथ के लिए क्या किया जाए, हाउ टू डाइवर्ट द अटेंशन, गिव देम स्पोर्ट्स, ताकि दे रिमेन फोकस्ड. एंड इट इज इन अ पॉजिटिव सेंस, नॉट नेगेटिव सेंस. इंडियन गवर्नमेंट की भी पॉलिसी है कि भाई जहां जहां पे अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट है वहां पे स्पोर्ट्स तो चले कम से कम, अग्रेशन निकल के आए वहां. तो स्पोर्ट्स एज एन इकोनॉमिक थिंग वो तो अलग बात है. आई एम नॉट स्पीकिंग ऑफ दैट एंगल. आई एम अदरवाइज ऑल्सो टू हाउ टू टेक अग्रेशन अवे, हाउ टू engage the youth. Sports. So you have football, etc., becoming very popular at that time. It was also encouraged by the government to support, to instill the sense of national identity. Then you have music and theatre. For example, melodrama. In Bollywood, you have seen such a huge amount of melodrama. बार बार सास की पहुंची वगैरह. क्यों? It's a lower middle class thing. इतने इफ्यूजन ऑफ इमोशंस को देख के जो आदमी उसमें घुस रहा है, उसको एंजॉय कर रहा है, दैट पर्सन इज अदरवाइज वेरी मच फ्रस्ट्रेटेड. जिंदगी में काम करते थक गया आदमी है, और वो ये सबके घर में कहानी है, बिकॉज मोस्ट ऑफ अस कम फ्रॉम दैट क्लास। सही बात है। हंस क्यों रहे आप इतना? आपको लग रहा है कमेंट्री हम पे चल रही है? No, this was a question. UPSC asked a question: the experiences that we are having right now, to what extent they were experienced by England or any other English nation 150, 200 years ago? और क्या हम उसी रास्ते जा रहे हैं? If that is true, it is wrong. Because then history is linear. जो उन्होंने किया वो हम करेंगे, मतलब आज वो जो वहां पे है वहां पे हम 100 साल बाद पहुंचेंगे, मे बी लीप फ्रॉग करके 50 साल बाद पहुंचेंगे, बट इट इज नॉट दैट. We may have different experiences, we may go to different destinations, but there are some similarities of human experiences. ये बात. Anyway, and then you have to add the environmental impact as well. You know, pollution, you have deforestation, you have climate change. So these are all long-term impacts also, and immediate impacts as well. Pollution affected the people. You have, for example, London fog. ऐसी कोई चीज होती नहीं, वो तो ब्रांड है, बट लंदन स्मॉग वाज देयर कि पूरा का पूरा शहर 4 दिन पूरा का. आज तो दिल्ली में जो हो रहा है इन द मंथ ऑफ नवंबर एवरी ईयर, बिकॉज ऑफ पराली इन एग्रीकल्चर एंड इंटरनल सोर्सेस ऑफ पोल्यूशन, कंस्ट्रक्शन हो, ट्रैफिक हो, या फिर यहाँ का एनर्जी सोर्स हो, प्लांट वाट एनर्जी प्लांट वाटर. दिस इज अ टिपिकल इंडस्ट्रियल सिटी इन इंग्लैंड इन 1850 1840. कुछ फर्क नहीं, वहां पे ये सब हो चुका है जो हम आज के दिन में देख रहे हैं. दिल्ली का पोल्यूशन कैसे कम होगा? Indian cities are not livable that way. So we have this, but I will give you one more contemporary and a very interesting example. It is called as industrial melanism. आपने बहुत, it's a very famous example, आपको शायद पता भी होगा. You know that moth, पतंगे जो होते हैं, because of industrialization, so much pollution occurred in those cities that moth जो white color के होते थे, paper moth, वो धीरे 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 कम हो गए, and the black color के moth survived more. So black moths के नंबर बढ़ गए. So even पतंगों का रंग बदल गए within a generation. So much quick is the selection, natural selection, डार्विन की थियरी, कि आपके सामने within a couple of generations at max we have change in the color of moth. ठीक है, तो मतलब पतंगों के रंग, इतना पोल्यूशन है वहां पे, काली आई हुई है. Industrial melanism is a typical phenomenon that you come to know. We have seen all the problems. The question is how the system responded, the political system. That is why I have put the political impact at the end. It led to the entire transformation of the political culture of England. Firstly, we have the rise of liberalism. जो हमारा next chapter है वो वही है, the rise of classical liberalism. When we study our next chapter, British democratic politics, from 1815 to 1850, we are actually studying liberalism, classical liberalism. And then demand for the political reform. So one of the major demands of liberalism. It gave rise to various social and political movements. For example, the Charles Dickens novels, there is a term, I was watching this series long time ago, The Wire. It one of the, मतलब मैंने देखी हुई आज तक की सबसे बढ़िया सीरीज है द वायर. Fantastic commentary on individual and institution. It's about Baltimore City. In few seasons, they take one issue in each season. In one of that, there is a newspaper, a city newspaper, and a journalist is going to get some news. Editor आते बोलते हैं कि भाई ऐसे खबर लेके आ जो मैं छापूंगा, लोग अपने अपने व्यूअर्स, अपने रीडर्स पढ़ेंगे, उनका दिल दहल जाए. Bring something Dickensian. Bring something Dickensian. What is Dickensian? Charles Dickens से आता है Dickensian. Dickensian is a word that he is using. मतलब ऐसे देख के कि भाई एक आदमी इतना गरीब है, ये कोई बहुत ही नुकसान हो रहा है, या बहुत लूटा जा रहा है, बहुत एक्सप्लॉइट किए जा रहे हैं, तो सुन के देख के दर्द आ जाए, आंखों में आंसू आ जाए, ऐसे कुछ कहानी लेके तो मैं छापू तो पैसा मिले. तो डिकेंसियन, तो चार्ल्स डिकेंस की किताबें थी. ही एक्चुअली बिकेम वेरी पॉपुलर, यू नो. एट दैट टाइम द बुक्स वेर सीरियलाइज्ड. एक साथ किताब बाद में छपती थी, पहले उसके चैप्टर्स एक एक करके पब्लिश होते थे अखबारों में, मैगजीन्स में. And those journals and magazines, for example, from England, they used to go to अमेरिका। तो न्यूयॉर्क के पोर्ट पे लोग खड़े होते थे, अब जहाज आएगा और जहां से माल उतरेगा, बक्सा खुलेगा, मैगजीन का नया इशू मिलेगा, मैं पढ़ूंगा कहानी में आगे क्या होने वाला है। बिंज वॉच उस समय था नहीं, they had to wait on the port to wait for the ship to come. They can get a new issue and read the next part of the story. Story was serialized. Charles Dickens became extremely popular even in America. It was a serialized fashion of his story writing, and जब serial खत्म हो जाएगी उसकी, उस किताब बनेगी। Anyway, so Dickens, and you have trade unions also. All these people, the writing, the activity, the speeches, the journals, the pamphlets, वो लोगों का conscience को दहल दिया, so much so कि people wanted to have some change. So we have, for example, Sir Chadwick. Now, Sir Chadwick in 1840s was very active. Because of his advocacy, the new law was passed in England. It was called the Public Health Act of 1848. For the first time, the municipalities took the responsibility that we have to provide tap water to the people. पहली बार हमारी जिम्मेदारी है ये माना उन्होंने कि शहर में घर घर में नल से पानी जाएगा। हम जो आज हर घर नल की बात कर रहे हैं, ये कानून वहां पे 1848 में आता है। हम 150 साल पीछे चल रहे हैं। ओनली रीजन इज वी वर कॉलोनाइज्ड, वरना साथ साथ चलते। बट एनीवे, so Robert Owen, will discuss Owenism in some time in detail, but he also was a factory owner who believed in some kind of reforming system. So he experimented with new factory management techniques, improved the working conditions, and लोगों मजदूरों का भला कैसे हो, जो अच्छा मैनेजर होता है उनको शिक्षा मिले, उनको फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन मिले, उनको ये मिले वो मिले, कैसे किया जाए। He brought many such techniques, and he also formed many cooperative communities in America, not in England. But he was originally English. So you have, for example, New Harmony in Indiana, etc. तो वहां पे जाके सब लोग मजदूरी साथ में आके क्यों ना अपना संगठन चलाए। This form a community based on those principles in nowhere. So these were experiments that did not go well, they failed. But it shows that there are some people who want to bring some change. Then you have, there was also social movement like Chartist movement. We have to see that in detail in some time. And finally, all of this led ultimately to the growth of this ideology of socialism. And one of the socialistic ideology was communism of Karl Marx. So you have all these things coming together as a response to the industrial revolution. Initially, state ने कहा हम कुछ नहीं करेंगे. State is a laissez-faire state, night watchman state. How can we intervene? आप एक तरफ बात कर रहे हो free will, free trade. You want minimalistic state which doesn't intervene in the market. But the reform movement forced the government to intervene in the market. आपकी जिम्मेदारी आप छोड़ नहीं सकते. So you have also, by the midst of the 19th century, for the first time, the emergence of modern welfare state. For example, you have reform acts तो है ही, you have labor laws, various labor laws coming up. Factory Act of 1833 and 42, especially the 33 is very important one for the first time. या 10 साल से छोटे बच्चों को काम नहीं लगवा सकते. You have to provide some basic safety, you have to provide some education, all those things. 10 Hours Act, you should not make people work for more than 10 hours. Mining Act, again safety issues, all those things started to come up. You also have emergence of welfare state. Soon the state began to drop the old idea of laissez-faire and to extend its reach into economic and social affairs. But ये जो चीज है welfare state that emerges with the maturity of liberalism, especially in the Gladstonian era in 1860s, 1870s. So ये reform का second half of 19th century में you see those changes happening more. In the first half there is debate. Should state intervene? Should state not intervene? And then you have imperialism also because of the industrial revolution. Lenin साहब ने किताब लिखी है Imperialism, the highest form of capitalism. It's a very famous book. It talks about the inherent internal requirements of capitalism, where at one stage it has to go for imperialism, otherwise ये collapse हो जाएगा. वो क्यों किताब लिखी, आपको थोड़ा कॉन्टेक्स्ट बता दूं उसका, although we'll study that in detail later. कार्ल मार्क्स ने जब उसका गणित बनाया था, in that he said capitalism digs its own grave. खुद की कबर खुद खोदता है, उसमें गिर जाएगा. Why? Because the internal contradiction will increase to such a level जहां पे ये होना है, but वो हुआ ही नहीं. Why it did not happen was the question that emerged after 1850s and 60s and 70s gradually, when Karl Marx was very old by that time. उसने अपने आखिरी में कुछ लिखा है, and Lenin took it much forward, where internal contradictions जो बन रहे थे अंदरूनी domestic issues, उनको लोगों ने overspill कर दिया. Reduce the tension inside, it has conquered some colonies. तो टेंशन overflow हो जाएगा. So imperialism was outcome of capitalism as per the Marxist ideology. Marxist ideology, not the other ones. We'll discuss later. The British Empire expanded to secure resources, markets, and strategic locations to support industrialization. Soon, other industrialized European nations also turned their eye towards other countries, and there was a competition and nationalist aggression to capture more and more part of the world, and that led to competitive imperialism also. So all these were the impacts of industrial revolution. ठीक है, it was not that difficult. Hard times की story. Hard times make there is a fictional term to coke town. तो कोक टाउन होता है, यहाँ पे सारे नाम ही कोक टाउन. ठीक है. Anyway, do you have any doubt online? 1 plus AC 2001. Kanishk Tyagi, Mehboob, Sudeep. No sir. Okay. The 1 plus है कौन वैसे? I used to have 1 plus. I wanted to get a new phone, then everybody dissuaded me from buying a Chinese product. So I bought Samsung phone. Anyway. So let us go to the next chapter. आप बंदो साहब हो गया? बंदो साहब का है? अच्छा, तभी सोचा कौन है. Now we are starting a next chapter, British democratic politics. Why I am syllabus में से साथ में नहीं दिया है, हमने syllabus को rearrange किया है. So this topic I am teaching here because here you see the details of the direct impact of industrial revolution on Britain. So you should have those connections in mind very clear. Ideally in our syllabus क्या दिया हुआ है? Industrial revolution Britain and then in other countries also. तो हम वो इसके तुरंत बाद next lecture में देखेंगे. In other countries and their consequences. But here, let us look at the politics that happened in Britain from 1815 to 1850. It is exactly parallel to what we have seen happening inside Europe, the revolutions of 1820, 30 and 48. ये उस समय हमने देखा था पेटरलू मैसेकर, चार्टिस्ट मूवमेंट, रिफॉर्म एक्ट. सो फॉर द 1820 का पैरेलल है पेटरलू मैसेकर, 1830 का पैरेलल है रिफॉर्म एक्ट, 1848 का पैरेलल चार्टिस्ट मूवमेंट. वी हैव सीन ऑल दिस थ्री मेंशनिंग अर्लियर. अब उनको डिटेल्स में देखेंगे. नाउ दिस चैप्टर एक्चुअली इज supposedly a very big chapter. British democratic politics of 1815 and 1850. We have parliamentary reforms, free traders, and chartists. So they have specifically mentioned 3 topics. Because if I start studying the British politics of 1815, 1850, what strikes to my mind as a student of history is the absence of one important keyword which underlies all these 3: parliamentary reformer, free trader, and chartist. एक fundamental keyword है, वो है classical liberalism. Liberalism, liberal thinkers and उनकी idea. Why classical? Because उसमें classical था. It is actually an economic liberalism. Liberalism has shifted, has evolved through multiple eras. उसके हर era में principles अलग अलग थे. आज के दिन में कुछ अलग है. हम उस जमाने की बात कर रहे हैं, तो वह उस जमाने को हम कहेंगे क्लासिकल liberalism. It is a free trading liberalism. Free trade. Simple. Adam Smith. So we shall look at the basics of the classical liberalism and the reasons why it arose, the ideas it propounded, the reforms it sought, and some important thinkers. Once that is done, then we'll come to these three parts. ताकि आपको कॉन्टेक्स्ट क्लियर हो. यूपीएससी में वो कॉन्टेक्स्ट आपको नहीं पता होगा, यू विल नॉट बी एबल टू राइट आंसर्स प्रॉपर्ली. ठीक, तो आई विल बी गोइंग थोड़ा सा आउटसाइड टू क्रिएट कॉन्टेक्स्ट एंड देन कम इनसाइड. Otherwise, most of the syllabus that I have put in this PDF is created from the PYQs only, because this topic then becomes very huge. Let's read the questions first, then you will come to the what I'm speaking about. So we have British liberalism in the 19th century, but when we say 19th century, we focus on the first half of 19th century only. जब लिबरल पार्टी इमर्ज होती है मिड 19th century में, एक नई पार्टी बनती है, लिबरल पार्टी, and then Gladstonian era begins. Gladstone becomes the prime minister 4 times from 60s to 90s, and he brings lots of municipal, financial, ये वो बहुत कुछ करता है. It's era of Gladstone versus Disraeli. Disraeli conservative है, Gladstone liberal है. But that important part of politics happens in the second half of 19th century, जो हमें नहीं पढ़ना है. We'll focus on the first of 19th century only, because in our syllabus it is mentioned 1850. So we are taking that snapshot only. ठीक है, समझो कि आप क्या नहीं पढ़ रहे हो, कि पहले भी लिबरलिज्म था, बाद में भी है, बट हमारे सिलेबस में इतना बीच वाला टुकड़ा दिया हुआ है. Why? Because that is significant. We are not studying history of England, we are studying history of the thought. हमें वो थॉट समझना है बस. ठीक है. So questions. Write a critical note on the effect of British liberalism on the social and economic life of the people of England. It's a very generic question from old syllabus. Account for the growth of liberalism in Britain in the 19th century. How far it influenced the contemporary social economic issues in the country. Again, old syllabus. This liberalism, my guess is that that topic was explicitly perhaps mentioned in syllabus before 2007. इसको हटा दिया है. But if you don't study this, आपको बाद में समझ में नहीं आएगा. You have free question, like for example, the free argument of the free traders, where a curious mixture of economic hard-headedness, social benevolence, cosmopolitan idealism, and class prejudice critically examined. 19 का सवाल है. This question is completely unanswerable if you don't know British liberalism. This free trader, वो लिखा तो है free trader है, तो you say कि हाँ syllabus में लिखा free trader है, but free trader is a part of liberalism. समझना पड़ेगा थोड़ा. Actually, this question can be answered even if you study the causes or the motivations of multiple actors supporting anti-corn law league. So actually, this free trade should, क्योंकि हुआ क्या है यहाँ पे सिलेबस में थोड़ी गड़बड़ कर दी थी इससे. यहाँ पर जो स्पेसिफिकली मेंशन किया पार्लियामेंट रिफॉर्मर्स, we know they are talking about 1832 Reform Act and movement for that. So not large principles, but specific act and reform. In case of Chartist also, again, not large principles, specific movement. But in case of free traders, why large principles, why not specific movement? There is a specific movement, and that movement is specifically about free trade. It is called Anti-Corn Law League. So syllabus ideally should have mentioned the parliamentary reformers, Anti-Corn Law League, and Chartist movement. तो आपको सिलेबस ज्यादा क्लियर होता, बट उसने लिखा है उन्होंने वहां पे फ्री ट्रेडर्स, तो आपको सारा पढ़ना पड़ेगा. एंड दिस क्वेश्चन एक्चुअली, दिस क्वेश्चन वाज, आई व्हेन अ क्वेश्चन अपीयर्ड दैट ईयर, आई वाज कंफ्यूज, पूछा कहां से. आई फाउंड आउट देयर इज अ बुक रिटन 100 years ago, नॉट 160 years ago, 1960s में. उस किताब में देयर इज अ सब सेक्शन कॉल्ड चार्टिज्म. इन दैट चार्टिज्म दे हैव गिवन दिस स्टेटमेंट. नॉट चार्टिज्म, सॉरी, एंटी-कॉर्न लॉ लीग. एंटी-कॉर्न लॉ लीग. So this question is anti-corn law league, but anti-corn law league चला कौन रहा है? Free traders ही चला रहा है. So free traders in UPSC's mind is equivalent to anti-corn law league. So I'm trying to decode the syllabus for us based on the PYQs. Then you go to the next part, Reforms Act of 1832. We have 4 questions. Though reform was inevitable, the act by which it was accomplished was open to grave criticism. So limitations of the Reform Act. Change in Britain came comparatively peacefully through democratic process in the first half of the 19th century, and a model of a functioning democracy through ballot box was successfully put in place. So again, impact and comparative aspect. Peacefully compared to what? यूरोप में हो रही है रिवॉल्यूशन के आफ्टर रिवॉल्यूशन, यहाँ पे नहीं होगी. क्यों नहीं हुई भाई? You should be able to compare The attitude of European governments towards the revolution is suppressed. Maternity is suppressing there. British are accommodating there. They're compromising, they're accommodating. So revolution 1830, 40 revolution doesn't happen in Britain. It happens in continent. So the attitude of British government vis-a-vis the demand for reform and attitude of the continental powers vis-a-vis demand for reform, इनको आपको compare करना है. And then to show why gradual change, incremental change, accommodation is better in Britain rather than in Europe, especially France. Right? Then the passing of the Reform Act marked the real beginning of the model party organization in England. Modern party organization in England, in the real sense, the present political system of England dates from 1832. Again, the question is not particularly about the Reform Act of 1832, it's about the consequences. The earlier question was about the limitations. And the third one, the first Reform Act, occupies a significant place in the constitutional development of Britain, critically examined. So, उसके पहले और बाद में के बीच में क्यों खड़ा है important. So, first, third, and fourth, all these three questions are primarily talking about the significance and consequences. What they have not asked is causes so far. But we have to talk about the significance and consequences. Chartists. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of chartists, including 2023, which was again a kind of partly a difficult question. I'll be honest with you. Review the background of Chartist movement. Despite its failure, how had their demands been met in the succeeding years? So, simple question. The roots of Chartism are partly political and partly economic. Elaborate causes. And you should be able to differentiate political causes and economic causes. तब आंसर बनेगा इसका 20 मार्कर 10 मार्कर नहीं है, लेकिन मिक्स करके लिख दो कुछ भी फटाक. Then roots of the Chartist movement in Great Britain were partly political and partly economic. Examined. So we have the same question, first 20 marker, then 10 marker. And यहाँ तो simple elaborate था, यहाँ तो critically examine भी हो गया. And still it is 20 marker, 10 marker. UPSC evolves. David Thompson is enough for Chartism. But anyway, you'll see that. I have considered everything there. The Chartist movement failed to achieve its stated objective, but succeeded in seeding the idea that a representative democracy should include all citizens, critically examined. Again, the long-term consequence and impact. And the question that was asked this year in 23, the Chartist movement not only fulfilled some of the demands of the middle class, okay, but its ramifications were felt among the working class, that is true, and the colonies as well. The impact of Chartism, how it was felt in different colonies. Although 10 marker hai, so if you cover middle class only, you will cover 1/3 of the base. If you cover the working class, you will cover 2/3 of the base. रहेगा 1/3 base colonies, आपको शायद नहीं पता होगा, कम से कम अपने 2/3 सवाल तो लिख लिया. ये तो आप कर ही सकते हो इसमें. ठीक है. Colonies के बारे में I will be very honest, I am trying to search for an answer. I could see a lot of impact happening in Australia and Canada. But my sense is that UPSC is not interested in the Australian politics. वो जाके थोड़ी पढ़ेंगे ऑस्ट्रेलिया का politics अंदर का, नहीं पढ़ेंगे. So I am trying to look for some connection with India. I think that would make more sense from UPSC point of view. अगर वो rational है कि चार्टिज्म का इम्पैक्ट इंडियन फ्रीडम मूवमेंट में कुछ हुआ है, क्या हुआ है, तो कैसे हुआ है, बाद में भले ही बाद में कांग्रेस के बनने के बाद इज इट, तो मुझे आई हैव नॉट बीन एबल टू फाइंड द लिंक येट. ऑस्ट्रेलिया कनाडा आई कैन टेल यू 10 पॉइंट्स नाउ, लेकिन वो जरूरी नहीं है मेरे ख्याल से. तो इस पार्ट को 1/3 ऑफ द क्वेश्चन, इम्पैक्ट ऑफ चार्टिज्म ऑन द कॉलेज, आई एम होल्डिंग ऑफ बिकॉज आई डोंट हैव द एग्जैक्ट आंसर दैट विथ व्हिच आई वुड बी सैटिस्फाइड. ठीक है, मैं आपको बना के ढूंढ के दे दूंगा कहीं ना कहीं से निकाल के. So this is the overall scope of the topic. Let us start with the chapter. The first is section. We have divided the PDF into 2 parts, liberalism and impact under it. Here we cover 4 parts. The liberalism idea and the reforms. Second is some important liberal thinkers. Third is the Great Reform Act and its limitations. And fourth is the anti-common law league movement and its success. These four parts will take care of middle class liberal reform. Then we go to the labor movement, working class movement. In Britain, during the same time, we come again in 1815. We start with Blanketeers' March. Even before that, we have Luddite movement, Luddites, Blanketeers' March, Peterloo Massacre, early Union era, Owenism. Then we go for Chartism, and then later New era. So we have to cover this 1815 to 1852 times. Once for middle class liberalism, then for working class movement. ठीक है, दोनों को मैं साथ लेके चलूँ ना तो बहुत हौच-पौच हो जाएगा, तो मुझे 2 बार कवर करना पड़ेगा वो, ताकि वो आंसर लिखने के लिए क्लैरिटी रहे. Let's start with British liberalism and middle class politics. Factors behind the rise of liberalism. A very simple part. Enlightenment ideas, especially because we are talking of the British context, we'll focus on major British liberal thinkers like John Locke, who comes in 1680s, and then Adam Smith in 1770s. These two are very important. They emphasized on individual rights, rule of law, and limited government. Then the impact of Industrial Revolution, which led to the creation of a huge middle class. And that middle class supported the liberal ideas because it was in their mafad, their benefit, so individual liberty and free trade. So rise of ideas and right of social class, दोनों चीजें important है, economic, social, and ideological. Then you go for the Reform Act of 1832, which is a cause and consequence both at the same time. These things led to the pressure on the government by which it created the Reform Act. Reform Act extended the franchise, reduced the poverty qualification, so voters expanded. More and more middle class could get elected. तो उनके MPs बढ़ गए, तो impact दोबारा उसके बाद भी उनके policies, उनके कानून बढ़ जाएंगे. So it is circular logic. Liberalism led to Reform Act. Reform Act led to the reinforcement of liberal ideas further. ठीक है. So it expanded the franchise and gave middle class a say in government. The middle class supported liberal ideas, liberal candidates, liberal policies. So early liberalism led to Reform Act of 32, and then that act led to more middle class say in the government. That led to more reforms in future. Then you go for specifically economic liberal ideas, which is called classical. We have thinkers, we have economists, Ricardo, Malthus, Codben. We even have, actually at that time, in the same definition falls Say also, John Baptist Say. But Say is French, हम यहाँ पे इसको शामिल नहीं करेंगे, but you should know कि Say भी आता है classical economic liberalism. But we'll see, Say's law हम देखेंगे जब हम देखेंगे, for example, I think Great Depression. उस समय I will bring back Say, S-A-Y, Say. यहाँ पे तो ठीक है. Apart from that, we have thinkers like Bentham and Mill. They're bringing utilitarianism. What is utilitarianism? We studied in GS4 anyway. Utilitarianism is a political justification of economic liberalism. Liberalism will focus more on the economic aspect. Utilitarianism will focus more on the political aspect. दोनों बात एक ही कर रहे हैं, घुमा फिरा एक इस हाथ से उस two sides of the same coin. We have Bentham and Mill also. Bentham, Mill, Ricardo, Malthus, Cobden. Sorry. We have these people bringing great ideas. So these are all the reasons that you see the maturity of the classical liberalism. So what were the demands? What were reform of the city? उनको चाहते क्या थे? First thing and the most fundamental aspect is free trade. Laissez-faire. We have seen the father of free trade is Adam Smith in 1776, but that was the height of mercantilism. He created the idea for the first time in Enlightenment, but Enlightenment era के बाद the ideas became widely accepted, widely popular. जो कांट ने क्या कहा था वोल्टेयर के बारे में? Voltaire lives in the era of age of enlightenment, but the age is not enlightenment. Enlightened rather. वही तो बात है. जब एडम स्मिथ था, उसकी आइडिया यूनिक थी, इंपॉर्टेंट थी, बट उसमें वाइड स्प्रेड एंड एक्सेप्टेड नहीं थी. यहाँ जाके होगी. And we have all these thinkers like Malthus and Ricardo. They are bringing their own economic ideas to extend the foundation created by Adam Smith. So, for example, the repeal of the Corn Laws. Corn Law was a protectionist policy, mercantilist policy. उसको हटाना became free trade. because it said if you want to import corn, मतलब कोई भी धान आपका import करना है, you pay very high taxes. Simple law ये था. Then second demand is the political demand. Go for parliamentary reforms. Liberals supported the process of making parliament more representative. They believed that everyone should have a say, regardless of their wealth or social status. Popular sovereignty continued. We have Great Reform Act of 1832, and we have again at the end of the 19th century, these liberals participate in the suffragist movement. What is suffragist movement? Movement for women's franchising. But that begins at the end of बहुत बाद में in 1880s, 1890s, धीरे धीरे शुरुआत होती है. It becomes very strong during and after the First World War. तो वो आगे वाली बात है. But these liberals later on supported that movement also. अभी वो support किसको कर रहे हैं? Workers को and middle class को. Middle class primarily. Then the focus is on individual rights and civil liberties. For example, Catholic emancipation. Because England was a Protestant country, they used to be anti-Catholic. Legally, Catholics had to undergo a lot of disabilities. उनको उन्होंने हटा दिया, उनको up to some extent equal treatment दे दी. You have free speech and freedom of press. The most famous John Wilkes. John Wilkes was the first editor or the owner of newspaper in 18th century. उसने पहली बार parliamentary debates को जैसे के तैसे छापना हमारा अधिकार है, and nobody can go and censor newspaper publishing parliamentary debates. ये परंपरा वहां से आती है, John Wilkes से. Free speech, prison reforms, there should be no torture. Slavery abolition is one of the great. We have seen that already multiple times. In 1833, slavery abolition. 1840, कहाँ कौन है people ये? Abolitionist movement कौन चला रहा है? Liberals. But there is a context. ये नहीं कि बस उनका दिल बहुत दरिया दिल लोग है. That is not the only reason. The economic structure has changed. Slavery benefited England in the pre-industrial era, जब उनको उससे काम कराना था. Now they want free labor, they want wage labor, they want competition. Now their need has changed. तो इनका दिल बदल गया. Slavery बड़ी खराब चीज है. So because England was the first country to industrialize, its needs were modified for the first time. So it was the first one to go against slavery as well. तो दोनों चीज इकोनॉमिक रैशनल भी है एंड एम्पैथी तो है कि आई वुड नॉट से कि हर आदमी वहां पे स्वार्थी था, वो नहीं होता है. So you have all these reforms coming up because of liberalism. You have reforms in the municipal administration also. You have Municipal Corporations Act of 1835, a very important act. The Reform Act of 1832 किसके लिए है? पार्लियामेंट के लिए. The similar act, इसका local version is Municipal Corporation Act 1813 साल के बाद. It is actually much more important क्योंकि अब now middle class can elect, can vote, can send candidates in the municipalities also. So national level पे Great Reform Act of 1832, at the local level we have Municipal Corporation Act of 1835, दोनों same ही. ठीक है, but that is in syllabus, it is not in syllabus. Then the Public Health Act of 1848, we have seen that already some time ago. And then the Education Act of 1870. The reformers and radicals के प्रचार के बाद ultimately they were able to persuade the government giving free and primary compulsory education to the age of 12 is the सरकारी जिम्मेदारी. पहली बार हुआ. I discussed the context also yesterday only. Then you have social reform. For example, labor condition was pathetic. So you have government stepping in and bringing factory. हमने सारे कानून तो देखे अभी थोड़ी देर पहले. We saw them in the context of the consequence of industrial revolution. Now we are looking at them as a demand of liberals. वही बात वहाँ पे रखी. Thus, liberalism played a major role in shaping the contemporary socio-economic landscape in Britain and helped to create a more democratic, free and prosperous society. तो ये आपका आंसर हो जाता है for these initial two questions of 1980s. बड़ा simple question. But we have to focus on some thinkers specifically. For example, Adam Smith, he comes in 1776, he wrote a book, Wealth of Nations. Right? Smith argued that the best way, मैं यहाँ पे खोलता हूँ थोड़ा पढ़ने में आसानी रहेगी. Oh, we change this chapter, no? British democratic politics. Smith argued क्या हुआ Okay. So Smith argued that the best way to promote economic growth was to let the free market operate without government intervention. We have seen the Smith already. We've seen his thoughts already when we saw Enlightenment, if you remember. हमने पूरा स्मिथ को अंदर से खोल के उसमें देखा था for at least 10-15 minutes. तो यहाँ पे not go in the detail because we are not in 1770s anymore. We're in 1820s and 1830s. हम 50 साल आगे की गाड़ी देखते रहे. तो स्मिथ को उसमें टच अप ऑन कर रहा हूँ. So the pursuit of individual self-interest, invisible hand, in competitive market would lead to the greatest good for greatest society. So there was one thinker, somebody in House of Lords in England. I was looking at his speech recently. He is liberal, he is leftist. I think a few months ago, Mr. Bhashan from Rajasthan. He said it is the invisible hand of Smith is the one which picks your pocket. So I like the line a lot. Invisible hand of Smith is the one which picks your pocket. But anyway, so he was trying to say that too much focus on market and individual self-interest as the main operational factor is not good. Government has to intervene sometime. So middle-class entrepreneurs embrace Smith's ideas of individualism, competition, and free trade. Economics of capitalism, Smith's basic idea were supported by British economists Thomas Malthus and David Ricardo. Like Smith, they believed that natural laws govern economic life. Their important ideas were the foundation of laissez-faire capitalism. अब देखो इसमें दो चीजें. First thing is that, like Smith, they believed that natural laws govern economic life. ये thinking, it's a typical Enlightenment thinking. Scientific revolutions का impact on Enlightenment क्या था? यही तो था कि scientific revolution applied rationality, discovered laws that operate in the physical world. Then Enlightenment thinker took the same method, same tool ahead and tried to apply rationality to find out the laws in politics, in society, in economy. तभी तो लॉ की बात करते हैं लोग. कौन सा कानून है? It's social law. So the same logic is going one stage ahead, and Smith के context को लोग आगे बढ़ाते हैं. Now we have other people who go. Now first look at Marcus. मतलब ये जो लोग हैं, मार्कस है, जेएस मिल है, बाप और बेटा, एक मिल दूसरा मिल, these have intimately connected with India. ये समझो. Mill, father and son, worked in India House, which was the headquarters of East India Company. East India Company के वहां के कारकुन थे. And Malthus was a professor in the Institute for Training of Civil Servants for India. लबासना यहाँ से पहले इंग्लैंड में थी. लबासना का टीचर था ये वहां पे. तो ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी के जो सिविल सर्वेंट सिलेक्शन के बाद आएंगे, जो इंडिया भेजेंगे, उनको तो these people are excessively important for India because their thoughts to some extent affected the processes, the events in England, but to large extent affected the civil servants who came to India and run India, governed India, made policies in India. तो इंडिया के ऊपर इनका इम्पैक्ट बहुत तुरंत और ज्यादा हुआ है. वहां पे भले ही थोड़ा कम हुआ हो, क्योंकि ये सबके गुरुजी थे जो हम पर राज करने वाले थे उनसे. But anyway, that India connection is not of any pertinence over here. Come to Malthus. Malthus argued that human population would tend to grow faster than the food supply, leading to widespread poverty and famine. Without wars and epidemics to kill the extra people, most were destined to be poor and miserable. And in 1840s especially, when you have those hungry 40s that we saw in the revolution 1840s, hungry 40s decade कहा था, potato famine. उस समय लोगों को लगा मार्क्स भविष्यवाणी सही हो रही है, खाना कम, लोग ज्यादा, लोग मरे जा रहे हैं. So in 1840s, it appeared as if Marcus is right. What he said actually, the population grows faster than food supply. He says population grows in geometric proportion. 1 के 2, 2 के 4, 4 के 8, 8 के 16. Food supply increases, technology increases, arithmetic progression. 1 का 2, 2 का 3, 3 का 4. So there comes a mismatch where there happens either some great war or famine, catastrophe, millions of people die, and then again the mismatch is gone. So मार्कस कौन है? थानोस. आधे लोग खत्म कर दूंगा. But so what was he saying? कि poverty is structural. It has to be there. The responsibility of poverty is not you and me and state. It is the population. तो poverty हटानी है, population कम करो. और अगर पॉपुलेशन कम नहीं हो रही है तो पॉवर्टी की जिम्मेदारी ना आपकी है ना मेरी है. आपका और मेरा क्या गिल्ट, क्या मेरी जिम्मेदारी, क्या आपकी जिम्मेदारी, हम क्या करें? ज्यादा बच्चे पैदा कर रहे हो तो दैट इज द क्रक्स. तो दिमाग से आधा आदमी था. मतलब ही व्हाट इज सेइंग ज्योमेट्रिक प्रोग्रेशन हैज नो सेंस. देयर इज नो एम्पिरिकल डेटा. इट इज प्योर हॉगवॉश. ऐसे ही बके जा रहा था. मतलब इट इज कंप्लीटली सेंसलेस व्हाट इज सेड. बट स्टिल आप लबास्ता के प्रोफेसर हो, आप जो कहोगे इंग्लिश बोलोगे. तो middle class at that time was concerned about social unrest by growing poor workers, embraced Marxist ideas about the need to limit population growth and family planning. Middle class was a newly created middle class. वो अभी भी खुद ही गरीबी से बाहर आए हैं. उनको डर है कि भाई समाज में रिसोर्सेस आर लिमिटेड, हमारे तो कोई छीन नहीं लेगा. देयर इज वर्किंग क्लास राइजिंग. तो हाउ टू रैशनलाइज दैट कि आपकी जिम्मेदारी आप खुद हो, हमारे हम नहीं हो. अगर आपको गिल्ट है, इट हेल्प टू रिड्यूस मिडिल क्लास गिल्ट कि अगर यार बाकी लोग गरीब है ऐसे कैसे होगा. व्हाई डोंट हैव गिल्ट? बिकॉज पॉपुलेशन ज्यादा है, हमारी जिम्मेदारी है नहीं. नॉट ओनली दैट, ही एक्चुअली मार्क्स इतना ट्विस्टेड आदमी था. द लॉजिक वाज सो ट्विस्टेड दैट द आउटकम ऑफ हिज थिंकिंग वाज दिस कि अगर आप गरीबों की सेवा करोगे, इफ यू ब्रिंग द वेलफेयर स्टेट, इफ यू गिव एनी काइंड ऑफ पुअर असिस्टेंस, अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट इन अश्योरेंस और सम काइंड ऑफ सपोर्ट, तो क्या होगा? दे विल हैव मोर मनी, ब्रीड मोर, इंक्रीज पॉपुलेशन, दोबारा गरीबी. तो स्टेट सपोर्टिंग पुअर is anti-poor, so state should not support the poor. Paying the poor for welfare will destroy the entire ecosystem, the social system. We should not support the poor. Let them die. मिडिल क्लास को अच्छा लगा है, उनका कॉन्शियस भी है कि एक तरफ लेट देम डाई वाला थिंग, दूसरी तरफ वी डोंट हैव टू डू एनीथिंग, हमारी जिम्मेदारी ही नहीं है. इट्स अ स्ट्रक्चरल लॉजिक. व्हाट डू आई डू? एंड उसका फायदा ये भी कि अगर मुझे गिल्ट फीलिंग भी आ रहा है तो मुझे गिल्टी नहीं लगेगा. मिडिल क्लास एम्ब्रेस्ड मार्क्स. इंडिया में वही हुआ. उसके जो शिष्य थे, दोज हु जॉइंड सिविल सर्विस इन 1840s, बाय 1880s 1870s वो बड़े बड़े अफसर बन गए गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया में. Now their controlling policy, 1880s is the decade we see. In 1877, huge famine. In 1897, 1899, huge famine. Why is there no action from the government side? Committee बनाए जा रहे, कुछ काम नहीं कर रहे. Literally, millions of Indians are dying. British are saying will not intervene to liberalism. अगर हम मदद करेंगे तो इनको आलसी बन जाएंगे, खुद मेहनत करें, पैसे कमाए, खाना खाए, हम क्या करें? तो colonial state becoming so anti-human, anti-Indian, का एक ideological strand goes back to Marxist. How do you use that in your answer? Famine policy में लिखोगे आप. In modern India, in famine policy, will include this point. So Marxist also justified the exploitation of the working class to some extent, which helped reduce middle class guilt. It contributed to the belief that poverty was an unavoidable consequence of overpopulation. हम क्या करें? आपके बच्चे ज्यादा है, ठीक है. The second thing is Bentham. Bentham is the father of utilitarianism. So Bentham believed that the best way to promote happiness was to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. We have seen that also. But everybody knows the greatest good of greatest number. The typical Benthamite idea. Utilitarianism aligned with middle class values of rationality, efficiency, and individual self-interest. It emphasized the pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain as the basis of ethical decision-making. So it's about economic prudence, profit maximization. अब देखो ये जो बात है ना, थोड़ी Benthamite ideas, they can be interpreted in both ways. On one side, when you say maximum benefit of maximum people, it can also mean the state should intervene. State should become welfare state, give support to people, then benefit maximize hoga. On the other hand, it can separately also mean state should not intervene because it reduces the efficiency. तो Benthamite idea in 1830-40 supported the state withdrawal, supported state restraint, supported state not acting in the social and economic sphere. So limited state, right? The same idea, maximum happiness of maximum people after one generation supported state intervention, state reform, state welfareism. But उस समय it meant this. Middle class embraced utilitarian ideas as it supported social reform to improve the lives of the working class and help in creation of just and equal society. And then David Ricardo. Ricardian laws, the iron law of wages. Wages tend to settle at the subsistence level. Common cut of the iron law of wages, wages tend to settle at subsistence level. Just enough to maintain the worker and their family at basic standard of living. उसके ऊपर आप पैसा दोगे, बच्चे पैदा करेंगे और दोबारा उनका खर्चा बढ़ जाएगा और उनकी क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ वहीं पे आ जाएगी. That was his basic idea. And any increase in the wages above this level would lead to increased population growth, which in turn would drive wages back down to subsistence level. तो गरीब आदमी मेहनत करके मजदूर आदमी कभी ऊपर नहीं आ सकता. That is his point. So Ricardo took Malthus's theory one step further. He believed that the underclass will remain permanently poor. हमेशा गरीब रहोगे. It suggested that workers' efforts to secure higher wages might be temporary, as any gains could be offset by increased population growth and subsequent decline in wages. बढ़ाने क्यों आपको? ठीक है. So, laissez-faire thinkers such as Smith, Malthus, Ricardo opposed government efforts to help poor workers in 1820s and 30s. They thought that creating minimum wage laws and better working conditions would upset the free market system, lower the profits, and undermine the production of wealth in society. So state should not be welfareist. ये thought था classical liberalism का. In 1820s, 30s, and 40s. After 1850s, liberalism changed. It started to ask state to support more and more poor people. It became welfare state. तो वो हमारे सिलेबस के बाहर की बात है. But उसका ये जो phase है, classical liberalism, it is about restraining the state. ठीक है? I hope you understand these thinkers and how the middle class embraced those ideas. It's not that difficult. वो जो British thinker था, House of Lords का बता रहा था, he also said one interesting thing about this. It is a political economy. It's not pure, it's a political economy. He said, ये सारे thinker एक कौन है? What era they represent? The era they represent is of a limited democracy. जैसे हम अभी देखेंगे रिफॉर्म एक्ट में, उस समय इंग्लैंड में द चैंपियंस ऑफ डेमोक्रेसी, कि हमारी डेमोक्रेसी बेटर देन दिस फ्रेंच एंशियन रेजिम. वी आर नॉट एब्सोल्यूटिस्ट, वी आर डेमोक्रेटिक. काहे की डेमोक्रेसी? डेमोक्रेसी ऑफ 2%, जिसके बारे में तो नाम क्या था? द फेमस थिंकर, द कंजर्वेटिव थिंकर, who derided the excesses of French Revolution from British Parliament. Not all of it. मेरे दिमाग से चला गया अभी वो नाम याद नहीं, बताऊंगा आपको. But point is, the British people who were very proud of their democracy, the democracy was actually not representative. It was representing only elite interest, upper middle class interest. That is why this thinker could speak. Huh? Not different, not in French, in England. So this democracy, ये Malthus or Mill and Bentham, ये क्यों Ricardo? Why are they popular? Because they represent not popular interest. They represent 2% लोगों का interest. That's all. तो वहां से आगे जाके हमें क्या करना है? We have to go for the great reform. एडमंड बर्क की बात कर रहा था, नाम भी लिखा हुआ है, the great conservative thinker. We have, he actually is very sad about this reform. Look at his quotation. But the age of chivalry is gone. अब वो दिन नहीं रहे. That of sophists, economists, and calculators has succeeded. ये जो professional class आया है, ये लोग आगे आगे. And the glory of Europe is extinguished forever. The middle class now will vote. They will make policies. क्या दिन आता है? गरीबों की तो बात ही नहीं, मिडिल क्लास के बारे में गुस्सा है वो. ठीक है. Anyway, point is, Edmund Burke was representing the society of 2%. And that is why the thinkers of this era are not concerned about redistribution of wealth. It is only in the 20th century when franchise is given to everybody, when everyone can vote. उस समय के जो नेता होंगे, थिंकर्स होंगे, पॉलिटिशियंस होंगे, लीडर्स होंगे, they will talk of redistribution, क्योंकि मैक्सिमम वोट तो वहीं पे है. अब उनकी बात सुनो, जिनके पास पॉलिटिकल पावर है उनकी बात सुनी जाती है. सिंपल बात. So the democracy that was being defended by Burke was the democracy of 2%. अब वहां से हम आगे जाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. The liberal thinkers are asking for the reforms. So causes, the circumstances leading to the enactment of the Reform Act were created by the impact of industrial revolution. The same things one by one again. The first important cause is urbanization, because the industrial towns emerged, जहाँ पे बड़ी बड़ी फैक्ट्री लगती है, हजारों लाखों लोग शहर में आ गए. We have seen from 1800 1900 the occupation structure changed. 90% urban area, 90% rural, 90% urban. तो शहर में कॉन्सेंट्रेशन बढ़ गया, बट द पॉलिटिकल स्ट्रक्चर डिड नॉट. जैसे आज के दिन में इंडिया में क्या है, नॉर्थ की पॉपुलेशन बहुत ज्यादा बढ़ गई है, बट सीट डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन पार्टी का वैसे पुराना है, एंड नॉर्दर्न पीपल फील कि भाई हमें ज्यादा सीट्स चाहिए, तो वी कैन डिसाइड द पॉलिसी ऑफ इंडिया. यही तो बात है, डिलिमिटेशन चाहिए. दैट इज द इशू. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, rotten boroughs and unequal representation. The Industrial Revolution resulted in the vast urban migration, whereby many of the existing constituencies got depopulated, which continued to enjoy representation of British party. तो पुराने गांव में कोई लोग रहते ही नहीं है, but they have more MP seats. शहर में लोग रहते हैं, but शहर तो अभी भी बना है 20, 30, 40 साल में, they don't have a single MP. तो rotten borough मतलब वो गांव, वो शहर जहाँ पे कोई नहीं रहता, रॉटन, खत्म हो गया. वो लोग ही नहीं है, बट दे हैव मोर एमपीज. सो मच सो, मैं आपको बताऊं, दिस पर्सन रिकार्डो, ही वाज आल्सो एन एमपी in 1820s and 30s, and he went to the parliament from a constituency, something called Arlington, some XYZ Arlington. And how many people were voters in that constituency? पता है आपको? 6. An MP of 6 people representing that constituency. On the other hand, जहां पे 50,000 लोग हैं, they don't have a single MP seat. And sometimes the old lords, उनके गांव में जो कम लोग हैं, फिर भी वो लोग लॉर्ड्स की बात सुनते हैं. So they are called as pocket boroughs. So we have rotten boroughs, and the other term is pocket. अपने जेब में ही है, वो अपनी सीट है. Pocket boroughs. So rotten boroughs and pocket boroughs, both of them were there. On the other hand, the newly expanding industrial towns had no or least representation in British Parliament. Thus, there was a need for delimitation. The second need was also from the class perspective. The British Parliament was under the monopoly of nobles and clergymen. The new classes created by IR, both capitalist and working class, did not have any representation in the Parliament. उनके voting rights ही नहीं थे middle class के पास. So the right to vote was based on property qualification. There was a need to readjust this qualification so that maximum people can start voting. So इस movement में both middle class and working class came together. Memory of the French Revolution. आपको कॉफी चाहिए सर? कॉफी पियोगे? मेरे पास रखी हुई है. हाँ, नहीं, आप तो पूछो, मैं आपको नहीं पूछ रहा, इनको पूछता हूँ, ये थोड़े परेशान है. The memory of the French Revolution and the fear of similar upheaval in Britain. Government ultimately accepted, because अगर हम नहीं मानेंगे तो यहाँ पे क्रांति हो जाएगी, and then it will destroy everything. That will not be allowed. Political pressure. Now we have reformists, we have radical thinkers, we have Tories, we have Whigs, different parties, all of them for their own reason अब mobilize कर रहे लोगों को. This pressure was manifested in the form of mass demonstration, petitions, and other form of political activism. The government realized it could no longer ignore the demands for reform without risking a revolution. तो जो काम वहां पे लुई 16 ने किया था, तो यहाँ पे इन्होंने नहीं किया. आपको मोडेटिव ऑफ द चेंज, भले ही नाखुश होके क्यों ना हो, कुछ कॉम्प्रोमाइज करें. So what were the provisions? Ultimately, they went for the reform. At that time, the Prime Minister was Charles Grey, and the King was, I think, William IV. And King William IV was himself personally very much interested in the reform process. तो उसने बहुत कोशिश की अपनी तरफ से भी. So Charles Grey accepted the reform. William IV supported actively and enthusiastically the reform process. तो कानून बन पाया. Now, what was the कानून? The Great Reform Act of 1832. उसमें क्या था? Firstly, we have delimitation. The constituencies with less than 2,000 population were deprived of any representation. 2000 से कम संख्या है वोटर्स की, इसको हटा देंगे. मतलब the seat from which that person, जिसका नाम हम देखा था अभी, Ricardo, was elected, was खारिज कर दी उसको, abolished. Now his ideas will not be accepted anymore. But anyway, the constituencies with 2,000 to 5,000 population were allowed one seat in the parliament. Thereby, 143 seats were vacated. And these seats were now reallocated to urban cities, the industrial towns, that they will get some representation. So first aspect of the Reform Act is a delimitation. The second aspect is voting qualification. In boroughs, a person of 10 pounds per annum tax was given voting right. And in rural areas, it was 5 pounds for peasants and 2 pounds for leaseholders, non-landholders. So they have now relaxed the property qualifications that more and more people will be eligible to vote. Middle class has got voting power. That is the main point. It provided that all those citizens whose names were included in electoral rolls at the time of announcement of elections shall have right to vote. So right to vote bhi aa gaya. Provided you are in such a constituency and you qualify those qualifications of property, you have right to vote. What was significance? It is here the questions come from. The Reform Act was a landmark piece. It was extremely significant. It symbolized Britain's ability to adapt its constitutional framework to changing social and political dynamics. You have to contrast that with what is happening in France. In 1830, वहां पे क्या हुआ? There came July monarchy, Louis Philippe, citizen king. वहां पे क्रांति दोबारा हो गई ना, यहाँ पे नहीं हुई. King still continues. So what you have is the parliament getting more representative, especially the House of Commons. So it is democratization of parliament. That is the first point. Parliament is getting democratized. Democracy is becoming more inclusive. Okay. Next point, empowered middle class. It shattered the monopoly of the clergymen and nobles. It paved the way for the entry of middle class. And middle class now gained much greater say in the government. Not only they got the representation, their ideas now were becoming powerful in the government policy in the forthcoming time. So the middle class was driving force behind industrial revolution, and by giving it a more say, it helped to create more favorable environment for the further economic growth. So industrialization के लिए जो कुछ करना है करना शुरू कर दिया ज़्यादा. This led to, for example, the abolition of the Corn Laws. We shall see in some time the Anti-Corn Law League is established immediately within a few couple of years after the Reform Act. The Reform Act के बाद का जो सबसे पहला, सबसे बड़ा, सबसे successful movement that middle class starts is the movement to abolish the Corn Law. And that was successful because of this Reform Act. Then the emerging middle class, अच्छा यहाँ पे middle class emphasized on colonization and severance from European conflicts. तो यूरोप से दूर रहो, वहाँ पे बहुत मारकाट चलती है. So in the entire midst of 19th century, the England at that time is having splendid isolation from the continental conflict. हम आपका because England was following the policy of splendid isolation, Italian unification, German unification could happen because they did not intervene. In case of France, they intervened all the time. At that time in the era of Napoleon, in case of Germany and Italy, they did not intervene. क्योंकि उनका समय वहां पे कुछ और चल रहा है. And rather than intervening in this continent, they are now focusing on the expansion of colonization. Middle class का benefit उसमें है. Then we have expansion of electorate. The voters increased in number from 3.5 lakh to 6.5 lakh. Reduction of rotten boroughs. Discrepancies prevailing in the distribution of constituencies were removed to a large extent. Not completely, but to a large extent. And represented parliament became, in the parliament you have now more MPs from the urban area. Rather, there is actually in India, when today we talk of delimitation, north-south issue is a grave issue. And certain people also have their important viewpoint, which should not be neglected in this context. They should not be penalized for their success. वो तो है ही, कोई doubt ही नहीं है उसमें. We have to find out some formula for both fiscal federalism, or finance commission के through, and on the other hand, for delimitation. क्या होगा नहीं पता. हाँ, तो वही तो इशू है ना, कि जिन्होंने कुछ किया, उनका फिर उनके वोटिंग कम कर दोगे तो सफर करेंगे, वो इशू है. बट आई एम कमिंग टू अ डिफरेंट पॉइंट. Delimitation is also important for one other reason. Even today in India, you see, India is 30-40% urban. Look at the MPs. How many MPs come from urban area? Less than the population warrants. अभी भी गांव वाले constituency से MPs ज्यादा चुन के आते हैं. So I am very much looking forward towards delimitation, because I think at least by 10-15% the urban MPs will increase. अपने शहरों की जो बकाल अवस्था हुई है, urban policies are given less important by government of India, वो बदलना शुरू हो जाएगा. When we have at least 50 MP ज्यादा आएंगे शहरों से और गांव से कम आएंगे, because population change हो चुकी. I am actually waiting for this thing to happen. More of urban India goes to parliament, which is the requirement of population. Looking, so delimitation is not only north and south, it's urban versus rural also. And that is what I am talking about here. Rotten boroughs कम हो गए, तो urban MPs बढ़ गए. And major shake-up, almost a third of the existing seats were redistributed to areas that had grown in population. एक तिहाई को change कर दिया. Then realignment of the political parties as well. The Whigs, who supported the reform, gained more prominence, while the Tories were divided. Whigs and Tories हमने देखा है पहले. Whigs are the liberal in this context, and Tories are the conservative. This realignment led to the foundation of modern party system, जो हम एक देखेंगे नीचे. And stability, it tried to address the social and political discontent and maintain the stability. Revolution नहीं हुई. And established the reformist tradition. This is a very important point. Now, for the first time, you have created a precedent. कि जनता की आवाज आएगी तो हमें ये सब करना पड़ेगा. It happened not only once, second time, third time, fourth time, gradually. So the similar reforms acts were enacted in 1867 to lower the property qualification much further and include more people in the voting. Then again in 84, and then by 1911, it became universal male franchise. And 1928, women also got the right to vote. तो ग्रेजुअली यही हुआ. अब बात यही है ना, यू सी अरविंद सुब्रमण्यम जो कहते हैं कि इंडिया एंड वेस्ट में फर्क क्या है. जब वेस्ट गरीब था, जब अमीर हो रहा था, एट दैट टाइम दे डिड नॉट गिव वोटिंग राइट्स टू पुअर पीपल. दे ग्रेजुअली एक्सपांडेड वोटिंग राइट. जैसे उनके पैसे बढ़ गए, स्टेट कैपेसिटी बढ़ गई. तो इनिशियली व्हेन यू हैव टू टेक टफ पॉलिसी चॉइसेस, उसमें गरीबों को वोटिंग अधिकार है ही नहीं. यू कैन टेक टफ डिसीजंस. ओनली दोज गेट वोटिंग राइट हु आर पेइंग टैक्सेस. And once you become rich, then over one generation, 2 generation, 3 generation, gradually you give voting right to everybody. But India में केस उल्टी है. जब स्टेट वीक है, गरीब है, in 1947, 1952, 51, we give voting to everybody. Even when you are poor, you have majority population which does not pay tax. That decides the policy. The people who pay tax don't decide the policy because उनकी संख्या कम. How many people pay income tax? 5%, 10%, not more. Indirect tax सारे लोग देते हैं, वो अलग बात है. That is a very, and half of the revenue comes from the indirect tax also. But the way we have chosen trajectory is more humane. But हमारा रास्ता भी बहुत मुश्किल है compared to their रास्ता. We don't have colonies. Everybody has voting right. तो जैसे चर्चिल साहब ने कहा था कि the best argument against a democracy is talking to some common person for 5 minutes. आप किसी भी सामान्य इंसान से बात करो 5 मिनट के लिए, फिर कम टू डेमोक्रेसी क्यों नहीं होनी चाहिए. दैट इज व्हाट चर्चिल, बिकॉज़ ही वाज कंजर्वेटिव. हमने कहा नहीं, इट डजंट मैटर, एवरीबॉडी शुड हैव वोटिंग राइट. अपना रास्ता बहुत मुश्किल प्रॉस्पेरिटी का. बट दिस इज आवर आइडियोलॉजिकल स्टांस दैट वी हैव चोजन कि हम ऐसे ही जाएंगे. एवरीबॉडी शुड हैव राइट. Anyway, so gradually it set a precedent and tradition of reform which ultimately led to the full franchise. Did Marxists consider productivity constant? Was it intentional? So the Marxists did not consider anything constant. He talked of productivity. New technology increased productivity leads to more food supply. So उसने बात करी है. But for him, it increases production and productivity दोनों को जोड़ के the ultimate output increases only arithmetically. Well, population increases geometrically. उसका ये point. And it had no empirical basis whatsoever. There is no econometrics at that time. Impact of Reform Act on political parties. ये बड़ा simple point कुछ है नहीं इसमें. You can cite historian, a very famous one, Eric Evans, in this kind of question. He, prior to the Reform Act, politics was dominated by a small number of wealthy landowners as clergymen and aristocrats. These individuals were able to control the outcome of elections by buying votes and intimidating voters, pocket boroughs, rotten boroughs. Now what will happen? The Reform Act of 32 expanded the franchise and there are more people, democracy enhanced, competitive system came into political system. It created the need for political parties to develop more sophisticated organization in order to mobilize voters and win elections. देखो हमने बात की थी when French Revolution happened, the left and right terms came for the first time. But again, have you discussed political parties there? No, because they did not exist. Jacobins, Girondins, Mountains, Montenegrins, these are clubs, these are associations, these are groups. They are not political parties. The political party as an idea emerges for the first time in this era. So, Tory and Whig are also not political parties originally. They are just groups. They are aligned with some group interest. But party ka matlab kya hota? You have sanghatan, you have organization, you have volunteers, you go to booth, you go to rally, you go for pamphlet, you get membership, you have internal elections. That entire huge machinery is political party for election that is created after this Reform Act for the first time. And then the party also, then you have emergence of Liberal Party, gradually then Conservative Party, in between you have LibLab, Liberal Labour वाली बात आती है, then Labour Party बाद में आती है, सब लेकिन चलो, point है कि this created because for the first time we have so many voters to go to. पहले voters के बाद जाने की बात ही नहीं आती थी. Go to one landlord, चार्ज करके जेब में. Now you have to go to 5,000 people. What do? You have to create a machinery. So this created a need for political parties to develop more sophisticated organization in order to mobilize voters and win elections. The same thing is happening in America at that time. जो आपको समझ में नहीं. Jacksonian democracy, as it is called, in 1830s. But in response to the Reform Act, the two major political parties in Britain, the Whigs and Tories, began to develop more modern party organization. They established local party branches, held party conventions, developed party platforms. They also began to use more sophisticated techniques to campaign for votes, such as distributing leaflets, holding public rallies. ये तब शुरू होता है. And it becomes such a normal practice in England and America both, that in 1860s, you have Lincoln-Douglas debate. ये तो तभी हो रहा है 1860s में. ये हो रहा है 30 साल के अंदर entire political structure changed in both America and England. When the voting right was given to more people. The act led to the emergence of political leaders such as Robert Peel. It is followers of Peel are called Peelites. Peel and Lord Melbourne, who played pivotal roles in shaping the early conservative and liberal parties. So you have party organization, party membership, party propaganda machinery coming up for the propaganda machinery. He says propaganda की जरूरत आपको पड़ती क्यों है? When you have mass of voters to influence, you need propaganda systems. So emergence of party propaganda also comes for the first time. So simple question. कोई बड़ी बात नहीं. The limitations of the act, they are important. Limitations. Continued unequal representation. While the act eliminated some of the rotten boroughs, it did not completely eliminate all the rotten boroughs. Despite the redistribution of seats, urban areas were still underrepresented compared to the population, so it affected them. So completely तो हुआ नहीं. While there was no provision of secret ballot. It is an important thing. Secret ballot नहीं था. आज हम we take it for granted. उसमें नहीं होता. बैठेंगे, बताओ तेरा ओपिनियन क्या तेरा होता है, तो you are very much open to abuse of power. कोई लठिया लाएगा, जमींदार आएगा, ऐसे मुझे वोट नहीं देगा, पकड़ के मारो तेरे को. So you have secret ballot is very important for democracy. It was not there at that time. Limited franchise. वी हैव प्रॉपर्टी क्वालिफिकेशन, सबसे बड़े मतलब मिडिल क्लास की गद्दारी का सबसे बड़ा एग्जाम्पल ये एक्ट है. इन द एंटायर मूवमेंट लीडिंग अप टू 1832 द लोअर क्लास वाज विथ द मिडिल क्लास. सबको मिलेगा, चाहे कद्दू कटेगा सब में बटेगा. और कद्दू कटा अकेले ने खा लिया मिडिल क्लास ने, है ना. वोटिंग राइट्स वर नॉट गिवन टू लोअर क्लास गॉट लेफ्ट हाई एंड ड्राई, परेशान. प्रॉपर्टी क्वालिफिकेशन शुड हैव बीन फर्दर लोअर्ड, बट नहीं. So only middle class got lower middle class, the artisans, the industrial workers got representation, no representation in the parliament. And women were excluded. सबसे मजे की बात यह है, the question of women's voting was not being raised by liberals. बाकी नहीं. When all the workers will get, उस समय women की बात शुरू होगी. The act did not address the need for reform in House of Lords. The focus was primarily on House of Commons. House of Lords continued in the pockets of Lords. Therefore, even when the Commons is partly democratized, Lords continues in the old system. So when they want to pass a policy, bring some new act, have some debate, दोनों में clash तो होना ही. So thus the monopoly of nobles and clergymen continued in the House of Lords. This also led to ongoing disputes between the two houses. And the act did not directly address the broader socio-economic issues. The movement for the reforms was partly politically oriented, but it had the socio-economic base also. उसके बारे में कुछ बात ही नहीं करी है. No welfare state, nothing. तो बाद में अलग-अलग एक्ट के थ्रू हुआ. But the fundamental aspect was not addressed, which created such a discontent in the first place. Okay. And then we have anti-con law leak. The moment it happens, the moment the act was, I think the act is very simple. कोई दिक्कत है नहीं इसमें. The moment that act was passed, gradually you have emergence of the anti-con law leak. You look at this topic, the heading in the syllabus. It says 1815 to 1850. Why 1815? There are two possibilities. One possibility is that in 1815, the Napoleonic era ends. So UPSC wants us to focus on the British politics in the post-Napoleonic decades. That is one. The other possibility is that in 1815, this act was passed, the Corn Laws. The Corn Laws were passed in 15 and they were ultimately removed, abolished or repealed in 1846. So times, in that context, 15 is important. So we know that already there is a demand for free trade. But 15 में होता क्या है? The Corn Laws were a series of tariffs and trade restrictions on the imported grains from 1850. The laws were intended to protect English farmers from cheap foreign import of grains. अब देखो होता क्या है? Farmers कौन है? जमींदार है. Now, because lots of systems are old, so villages and zamindari and agriculture are getting more protection from the government than the newly emerging economic sectors, that is industry. तो अब क्या हो रहा है? If you go for free trade, तो जहां जहां एग्रीकल्चर इंप्रूव हो रहा है, यू कैन इंपोर्ट द चीपर ग्रेन, तो किसान का नुकसान हो गया. इंडिया में यही होता है कि भाई टमाटर सस्ता हो गया, टमाटर महंगा हो गया. अरे भाई किसान को पैसे मिल रहे हैं, दिक्कत क्या? टमाटर खाओ, महंगा टमाटर. लेट द पीजेंट अर्न सम मनी समटाइम्स. उसके तरफ पहुंचे नहीं पहुंचे अलग बात है, मिडिल मैन वाला इशू अलग है, बट किसान को कभी ना कभी मौका मिल रहा है. तो यही इशू है, सेम इशू है, बट इन द रिवर्स वे, that the peasants are to be protected from the competition. If we go for free trade, the foreign food which is cheaper that will come into England, तो अपने किसान को नुकसान हो जाएगा. किसान कौन? जमींदार है. तो इसलिए कस्टम बैरियर खड़े करो. कॉर्न मतलब नॉट ओनली कॉर्न, ऑल टाइप्स ऑफ ग्रेन की इंपोर्ट शुड बी सो कॉस्टली कि अंदर वाला किसान उसको महंगा बेच पाए, और फिर भी दैट शुड बिकम द प्राइस, लोएस्ट प्राइस फॉर द कंज्यूमर. दैट इज कॉर्न लॉस. So the Corn Laws were intended to protect English farmers from cheap foreign imports of grain. They raised the price of corn, which increased the food cost and thereby poverty. अब शहरों में जो वर्कर है उसकी तो लग गई, उसके लिए खाना महंगा हो गया, वो तो गरीब है. Poverty among the working class, they were a deeply divisive issue in the first half of 19th century. तो उस समय क्या है? You have the free traders coming up. We have seen the names Ricardo, Mill, and Richard Cobden, etc. They emerged to advocate free trade. The Corn Laws became the focal point of the free trade movement. इसीलिए यूपीएससी का क्वेश्चन भी है वो Corn Law context में. The Corn Law League was founded in 1838 within 6 years of passing of the Reform Act. अब मिडिल क्लास के पास सत्ता आ गई है थोड़ी थोड़ी. Now they are active. They are forming anti-Corn Law League, and the founders are Richard Cobden and John Bright. These two are extremely capable, vigorously campaigning, effectuous, and they have the capability of mobilizing public opinion. So they start the movement, the campaign. What are the reasons? Why do they not want the Corn Laws? It is not only the reason of principle. The laws supported the landed aristocracy and agricultural interest, benefited the wealthy at the expense of the poor, consumers and workers. शहर के गरीबों का नुकसान हो रहा है और गांव का अमीर का फायदा हो रहा है. Basic point. So if you allow the free import या कम दाम में import, तो खाना सस्ता हो जाए. They were preventing British manufacturers from competing in global market. Why? Because if you want to hire the labor, you have to pay no higher wages because khana महंगा, you have to give more salary, more wages. So your production is costlier. You can't compete in the world market. If food is cheaper, you can give less wages, you have more profit margin, reduce the cost, you can sell in the global. Competitive बनोगे आप दुनिया भर में. And leagues, therefore you have to control the inflation. Important बात ये. Inflation बढ़ेगा, salary बढ़ेगी, तो फिर production नुकसान हो जाएगा. The league's economic argument was that free trade would lead to greater economic efficiency, prosperity for all, individual liberty, and also international peace. But वो चलो अलग बात है. They started उनके arguments हो गए. आप बोल सकते हो वैसे, but they were not talking कि source of import कहाँ से होगा. It's not raw. It is not about raw material. It's about food. गेहूं और धान. They are talking of only गेहूं. Corn laws की बात कर रहे हैं. In case of corn laws, it is primarily about dismantling a trade barrier for importing food grains. अब food में सब कहाँ से ले आओगे? Not only from India, from anywhere in the world, including continental Europe. वहां से भी जहां सस्ता मिले वहां से ले आओ. अच्छा वो तो simple. That's again in continent. It is again not in the context of India only. Anywhere in the world, they want to compete in Latin America. They want to compete in America, in continental Europe. जहां जहां हमारा जितना सस्ता माल उतना हमारा कंपटीशन में हम आगे जाएंगे. बस सिंपल है. See, this competition is with whom? The competition is with other countries which are industrializing. उनका माल सस्ता है तो हम पीछे पड़ जाएंगे. कंपटीशन वो है. And these are the arguments, but what is the movement? The campaign. Campaign happens at public level and intellectual level, social level and political level. So this grassroots mobilization was a key to its success. Published pamphlets, gave speeches, organized meetings and rallies and campaigns to educate public opinion. Also lobbied with the MPs in the parliament, जो उनके MP थे, middle class MPs, and the Economist, the great journal that we read every week. आज के दिन पढ़ते Economist आप कभी कभी. Economist was formed at that time to support the free trade. So Economist is one of the great magazines weekly that comes even today and that shapes the global opinion even today. आज के दिन में भी इसका जन्म ही हुआ है in anti-Corn Law protest movement for the support of free trade. It was a campaign mouthpiece at that time. So Economist, lobby in government and public mobilization, all of these things ultimately put enough pressure on the government, and government had to go for the repeal of the Corn Laws. And the repeal of the Corn Law happened in 1846. Therefore, we say 1846 was the year in which the British government officially adopted the policy of free trade. In 1846, under the leadership of Prime Minister Sir Robert Peel, the British government repealed the Corn Laws. This marked a significant victory for the free trade movement, a shift away from protectionism towards the free trade principles. But बात यही है, 100 चूहे खाके बिल्ली चली हज को. जब आपको फायदा हो रहा था, you went for protectionism for over a century, and when now you benefit from free trade, you move to free trade. But chalo, this led to a decrease in the price of food It benefited the consumers. Urban consumers primarily. It also led to the increase in the export. It was followed up by a series of additional related measures, including reduction in tariffs, gradual opening of British markets to foreign goods. This period of free trade policies is associated with economic growth and expansion of British Empire. Now, one more point I want to add here, जो notes में नहीं, this anti-Con Law League is actually a very good example of how a pressure group can work. In Indian politics, also we have pressure group like Lokpal Andolan के समय हुआ pressure group. So successful example in a modern democracy of a pressure group making the government change the law is anti-Con Law League. It became a model how to mobilize population in the cause of in support of one cause and get the government to change the law. इसमें और एक बात है, आप ये समझो, despite the middle class ने lower class को ठगा दिया 1832 में, so after 32 lower class was angry with the middle class, उसके बावजूद in this issue, you see the class interests are aligning. The lower urban class wants cheaper food, middle class wants free trade. There is no inherent contradiction. Both of them want the same thing. इसलिए भी this anti-Con Law League was able to mobilize not only middle class opinion, but also the larger public in its support. Government had to surrender. So alignment of class interest of middle class and lower class despite the antagonism due to 1832. ये बहुत important aspect. And secondly, the pressure group. Because after the law was repealed, this anti-Con Law League was liquidated. So pressure group politics कैसे काम democracy? तो democracy नहीं बन रही. So one of the reasons you will see, और इसमें right, left, top, down सब साथ में है. It's a broad public alignment. Now you go to. So I think the middle class interests are now clearly understood. कोई doubt है नहीं वहां पे. We have seen liberal thoughts, liberal thinkers, Reform Act, and anti-Con Law League and free trade. We have seen all these 4 aspects. There are actually 10 more aspects, and we have seen the political parties' conference also. 5 हमने देख लिया. There are 10 more things here involved if you go by the actual British history, but our PYQs and our scope of the syllabus doesn't demand it. So I will not go into the judicial reforms, the municipal reforms, the financial reforms. वो सब नहीं है, तो मतलब नहीं उसका कोई unnecessary burden नहीं बढ़ाते हैं. Let us stick to our syllabus. But I am telling this again and again because I can see that we have seen only the part of the. आपने बस चेहरे के बस आंख देखी है, आपके चेहरा दिखाई नहीं. You don't know how the face looks like of this politics at that time. But अपने पास कोई चारा नहीं है. आपको एक ही आंख पहुंचे उतने देख के आगे चलो. ठीक है. Any doubt online? सुदीप, कनिष्क, महबूब, कॉफी पी लो तब तक एक घूंट, फिर आगे चलते हैं. Okay, no doubt. Next part is working class movement. It is very easy. As England was first country in the world to experience the industrialization, it was the first country in the world to have working class. It was the first country in the world to have working class problems. It was the first country in the world to have working class movements. Simple about. Advocates of the laissez-faire economics maintained it was not the duty of the state to intervene between the employee and employer relationship. It's a market economics. Let them decide. Who are you to intervene? If you intervene, it will lead to disequilibrium and suboptimal outcome. हमें वो नहीं चाहिए. So in 1799, the Combination Act was passed prohibiting the formation of the trade unions in England. So government passed an act. It's called Combination Act, whereby trade union became illegal because it's a market. Worker and employee, both of them should sit together and negotiate. Khatam. So unions were made illegal in Britain because of the free trade influence. अब शुरुआत पहली बात कैसे होती? How did this working class movement start? This is a very primitive phase. We have the first movement is called Luddite movement. It is a primitive kind of working class activism. उनको कुछ पता नहीं था. They just thought the machines are coming, they're taking away our job. Who is our enemy? How are we becoming jobless? Because of machines. तो क्या करें? Machine को तोड़ दे. If you destroy the machines, then we'll get our job back or our wages back. बात खत्म. So that movement is nothing but the organized efforts of the old workers, old school workers, old type workers to destroy, to sabotage the industrial machines. और कुछ नहीं था. But it was very fundamental. क्योंकि उनको देखो, what does it show? It shows they don't have ideology. They don't have organization. They don't have the understanding of the deeper economic malaise. They have no positive alternative. So limited perspective. But दिख रहा है खत्म. This is not the actual labor movement. Labor movement will emerge after the Luddite. But Luddite is a very primitive response to the problems. The problems are very real. They are grave, but the response is very primitive from the worker side. So it arose in response to rapid industrialization as machines were replacing skilled artisans. They were job losses. Luddites were primarily skilled workers who saw machinery as a threat to their livelihood. They started to destroy machines, believing that it would help protect their jobs. Luddites engaged in acts of organized machine breaking and sabotage in textile mills. मतलब सैकड़ों लोग, not only 1 or 2 or 5, सैकड़ों लोग गांव शहर में जाके एक साथ प्लान करके रात में जाके मशीन तबाह कर दो. Many industries were destroyed because of that. It began in the vicinity of Nottingham toward the end of 1811, and next year it spread to Yorkshire, Lancashire, Derbyshire, and other places. So a mill and factory owners took to shooting protesters. आगे बंदूक लेके बैठेंगे, आए तो गोली मार देंगे. ये तो civil war की situation हो जाएगी. Ultimately, government had to intervene. Government also responded in a repressive way. It brought two things: एक नया law and military. Military was called to destroy the worker movement. And law में लिखा कि anybody destroys the machine will be given capital punishment, सजाए मौत. It was awarded. It was awarded. Several Luddites were hanged for their crimes. Now, why is it called Luddites? Because जहाँ जाते थे वो destruction के बाद, they used to have the pamphlets. And they used to give the warning कि हमने तोड़ा है. And वो signature which होती थी, who is to the person who authorized this? Name of that person was Ned Ludd. N-E-D-L-U-D-D. So was he a real historical person? We don't know. He could be a mythical figure. He may have come from folk idea, or he may have been some leader in some parts. Who knows? But सब जगह Ned Ludd ने हम कहा है तो हम करेंगे. It's a public myth is created to mobilize the population. तो जैसे हमारे यहाँ रोल होता है रूमर का. You have to create some symbols also artificially. Ned Ludd was their imagined leader. So say Luddite movement उसको बोलते हैं. Some comments. Luddites are today seen as symbols of resistance to technological change and as early defenders of workers' rights. For example, computer आए थे. So we have like UP बिहार के कुछ political parties है, सपा बसपा. These parties in 1980s had opposed Rajiv Gandhi. Will not allow computers to come. Computer आएंगे, job चले जाएंगे. अपनी banking industry stayed back by almost a decade because of that kind of obstinance. Luddite thinking. It's proper Luddite idea. Technology आएगी, job loss हो जाएंगे. So Sapa Baspa in 1980s were Luddite in the issue of computerization of banking sector. ये जो होता है. So Luddites are today seen as symbols of resistance to technological change and as early defenders of workers' rights. However, they were unable to prevent the broader adoption of machinery and factory-based production. तो ये होना ही है. You cannot oppose technological change. You have to adopt to it. You have to go one step ahead. You have to modify technology as per your need, or else you will succumb to the history. Although the Luddite movement was crushed by the authorities, it paved the way for the next stage of working class agitation. In England, it was an essential stage on the road towards working class consciousness. It raised awareness on the issues and contributed to the broader labor movement. The workers began organizing to advocate for better working conditions, higher wages, and job security. तो हुआ क्या? The first thing is that Luddites now understood उससे कुछ होना जाना है नहीं. Rather than destroying the machines, let us accommodate ourselves with the machines. Our demand is job. If you want us to learn how to use machine, we'll learn that, but you should give us higher wages, give us job security. A simple demand. So demands changed after the suppression and failure to that movement. Secondly, this kind of violence doesn't pay. We have to go for organized agitation. So labor consciousness, organized agitation, and objectives, all of them evolved. इसलिए Luddite is a primitive movement. एक बात मैंने नोट में शायद डालना भूल गया हूँ. You can note it down. In 1811 to 1813, when Luddite movement is going on, it is going on because of the economic crisis also. The crisis was connected to anybody? Continental system of Napoleon. Napoleon laid continental blockade, so manufacturers had to go for job losses. उसके बाद ये शुरू हुआ है. इस समय नेपोलियन कर रहा है Spanish Peninsular movement. He is just attacking Russia at that time, 1812. So continental blockade का भी contribution है in the creating economic hardship and then labor getting angry and violent. वो connection भूलना नहीं. It is not the only reason, it is a contributory factor. In the post-Napoleonic era, how it all changed? Now you have in a move, there was an acute economic slump, post-Napoleonic depression in 1815 के बाद के कुछ सालों के लिए. It was accompanied by chronic unemployment and harvest failure. The overall impact was worsened by the corn laws. We have seen the corn law brought in 1815 that made the food prices higher. गरीबों का खाना मुश्किल हो गया in the cities at that time, which kept the prices of bread high by prohibiting the importation of cheap grains or import of cheap grains. So that led to response from the working class. Agitations, riots after riots, rioting throughout Britain, working class people, papers started being published and received by wide audience. So government had to respond. ये सब अफवाहबाजी, ये सब नहीं चलेगा. What we shall do? We shall bring censorship, gagging act. So gagging acts were brought and suspension of habeas corpus. So somehow the government tried to deal with the labor movement, the emerging labor movement, with high-handedness. They suppressed Luddites and they also suppressed the publications and they wanted to bring habeas corpus to suspend karna. So ultimately, the people got angry and they thought, हम एक मोर्चा निकालते हैं. That morcha is called Blanket Years March. So in protest of the gagging acts as well as the poor working conditions in the textile industry, workers in Manchester attempted to march on London to deliver petition in a demonstration. The Blanketeers, named after the blankets they brought to sleep on the roadside during their journey, were intercepted, with most participants either arrested or chased off by the British military. The march was broken up violently, and its leaders were imprisoned. Authorities were in no mood to accommodate anything. It is very much unlike what they did for middle class liberalism. यहाँ पे तो पूरी तबाही. Every time you bring something, arrest, acts, military is being used again and again to destroy the workers' movement, and also capital punishment. The state came heavy-handedly on all these movements. Ultimately, these people understood कि इससे कुछ होना जाना है नहीं. We should not bring the economic demands. They are not being met. It's a failure. Why is it a failure? Because we don't have the political rights. Now the movement shifted. The demand shifted. We don't want job security. We want that position of authority in the politics which will decide job security. तो हमें political, जो अम्बेडकर ने कहा था, we need political power first. फिर हम अपना देख लेंगे, खुद मुख्तार है. So the demand of the worker movement have changed. You have political reform. Now the reformers identified parliamentary reform as a solution, and a mass campaign to petition parliament for manhood suffrage began. सबको voting right दे दो. This part supported the reform movement for middle class also. अब साथ में आ गए ये दोनों. The political demonstrations increased in popularity throughout the industrial Britain. It culminated in the incident of in Manchester, जहाँ पे लोगों की बहुत बड़ी भीड़ साथ में आई थी, and then massacre. Police attacked on them, fired at the crowd. It led to 80,000 की crowd थी, एक मैदान में जमी हुई थी. Resulted in 18 deaths and up to 500 injuries. It happened in the city of Manchester at a place called some Peter something. तो उसको उन्होंने कहा पेटरलू मैसेकर। पेटरलू नाम की कोई जगह है ही नहीं, इट इज जस्ट टू राइम विद वाटरलू, इट इज पेटरलू। ठीक है। अब ये लोगों का मैसेकर भी ऐसे होता है ना, यू हैव सीन बोस्टन मैसेकर, 3 से 5 लोग मरे। इन पेटरलू मैसेकर 15 लोग मरे, 18 लोग मरे। इन इंडिया जलियांवाला 1000 लोग मरे। इन फेमाइन 10 लाख लोग मरे। अपने नंबर बड़े कॉमन होते हैं, the scale is different, but anyway, Peterloo massacre. British government responded with draconian measures. They are in no mood to tolerate it. They brought 6 acts that allowed government searches, prohibited large assemblies, punished anti-government publications. Sab kuch to they are still going on. Ultimately, gradually, after 1823, 1824, they realized कि इतना हम नहीं दबा सकते बार बार. We have to give them some rights. The reform movement was very powerful. So they said, अच्छा चलो एक काम करते हैं, रास्ते पे मत उतरो, don't go for violence, don't go for destruction of property. If you limit within the constitutional realm and peaceful, we give you some rights. What rights? Now we take away the restrictions on unions. हमने Combination Act को repeal करना है. We can form the unions. Unions will be legalized. You can unionize and then negotiate with your manager. So the Combination Act of 1824 finally repealed all the previous statutes concerning trade unions, and in 25 also, the unions were continued to exist. Unions continued to exist. In the 1810, 1820 also, when they were outlawed, it does not mean they did not exist. They were there. They were just outlawed. They were secret. They were underground. And everybody knew that. Now, after 24-25, जो underground activity चल ऐसे भी रही है, तो legalize कर लेते हैं, ताकि control कर पाए. So you have unions getting legalized. That led to something called as early trade unionism. It is the first beginning of trade unionism. It is a very small phase. It was not very successful as well. It was not very successful as well. But it is important. These laws brought trade unions into legal existence. Until then, trade unions had been operating secretly, but hereafter, they were allowed to negotiate openly with the employers. However, these trade unions were primarily of skilled labor only. Skilled labor only, not semi-skilled, unskilled, जो कि majority है. And they are not about peasants, and they are definitely not about the landless peasant. And so even that entire hierarchy में urban worker जो skilled है, उनके they are more aware, they are more educated, they have relatively more salary. उनकी है. These early unions, often limited to skilled workers, focused on issues like wages, working hours, apprenticeship standards, etc. And by 1830s, we have hundreds of such unions in Britain, but they did not bring much relief, because even though the legalization of unions has happened, otherwise the system is not very responsive. Courts often deem strikes illegal. So strike is still illegal. Union activity is closely scrutinized by police all the time, and employers are hostile. So unions को बस legalize किया है, उनको accept नहीं किया समाज ने and government ने. Trade unionism of this period was often fragmented, and there are many unions in different trades. जैसे fishermen's का trade अलग होगा, coal miners का अलग होगा, wharf का अलग होगा, barbers का अलग होगा. So you have different unions. Ultimately, they make one attempt. They make one attempt under Robert Rowans called Grand National Consolidated Trade Union in 1834, but it did not succeed. They don't have national. हर गांव में, हर शहर में, हर ट्रेड का अपना संगठन है. And that too only of those trades जहाँ पे you have skilled workers. So it was not very successful. But one thing was important, that this kind of sangathan creation ultimately helped into taking the demands forward, bringing the class consciousness. And when the Chartist movement started, they supported the Chartist movement. Chartist movement rather could spread very easily across different cities with the help of the organizations created by trade unions. So early trade unionists contributed to the development of Chartist demands for political reform. The Chartists saw trade unions as an important tool for organizing and mobilizing working class. Apart from that, parallel to trade unions, we have Owenism also. Now, Owenism is something that we have to discuss in detail after a couple of lectures once more when we study utopian socialism, but अभी यहाँ पे context है तो थोड़ा देख लेते हैं. It's by Robert Owen. Robert Owen was a person, he was an industrialist himself, a textile manufacturer. He had some ideas about how better, ऐसे लोग होते हैं ना जो अमीर है, but they have got conscience. They want to work, how to go for it. So what were his ideas? He believed that socio-economic problems due to the industrial revolution could be solved by creating a new social system based on cooperation and equality. And this is so much anti-Marxist. मार्क्स तो अभी हुआ ही नहीं, ये अलग बात है, मार्क्स बहुत छोटा है इस जमाने में, बट द आइडिया मार्क्स के बाद आएगा. बट द आइडिया इज दैट मार्क्स बिलीव्स इन क्लास कॉन्फ्लिक्ट, द एनिमिटी बिटवीन द bourgeois and proletariat. Owen actually is himself a bourgeois. In the Marxist idea, it will not work because he is saying सब लोग साथ में आते हैं, प्यार से रहते हैं, मिल बांट के खाते हैं. So if you cooperate, if you have belief in equality, there will be no problem. It's a very utopian idea. He emphasized importance of improving the working conditions and education of workers. His writing and experiments contributed to the development of early socialist thought called utopian socialism. Utopian socialism, let me write the word for you. We have this topic in your syllabus also. Where we see at least 3 important utopian socialists in detail, and their work and their ideas and why they failed, what were the limitations, and they compare and contrast those with ideas of Marx and Engels. So one of those 3 was Robert Owen, utopian socialist. His work laid the intellectual foundation for cooperative socialism and utopian socialism, which influenced later thinkers. उसने क्या किया? उसके 2 चीजें बस इंपॉर्टेंट है आपको, only 2 things. One thing was his new Lanark. He founded a factory. He was industrialist. It was his own industry. There he became he made it into a model industry. अच्छा management, pro-working initiatives, सबके लिए खाना अच्छा, कपड़े अच्छे, पैसा अच्छा, education, support, all कुछ होगा तो कैसे होगा? उसके करने के बाद भी why does industrialists not want to do it? Because it cuts the profit margin. He said कि देखो, if you do all these expenses, take care of labor, and even then the factory can remain profitable. So remaining within the capitalist paradigm, I can run the factory by supporting all the labor, by taking all the labor reform and labor welfare initiatives. So it became a sensation. ऐसे कैसे हो सकता है? That new Lanark became a tourist destination for all the thinkers at that time in Europe. सब लोग जाकर देख रहे, अच्छा सच में ऐसी फैक्ट्री है जो प्रो लेबर काम करती है फिर भी प्रॉफिटेबल है. People could not believe. तो उसने वहां पे एक ऑफिस खोल दिया just for visitors to come and see. So it became a sensation. But he did not stop there. He went to America. In America, he formed multiple communities, especially the New Harmony community in India. Now, वहां पे out in the jungle, let us create a new society altogether based on new principles. And he attempted it to be self-sustainable. बट ही इनिशियली थॉट उसको 2 साल में सपोर्ट करूं, तो उसने अपने पैसे लगाए, कम्युनिटी चली. 2 साल बाद उसने पैसे रोके कि अब तो आप सस्टेनेबल हो गए क्या? नहीं हुए, झगड़े हो गए, कोलैप्स हो गई. So you have these 2 experiments, New Lanark and New Harmony. Both of them were not long lasting. Owenism gained popularity in 20s and 30s, but by 40s it was a failure. However, it had a significant impact on development of the workers' movement. His ideas had a lasting impact on development of socialist thought, labor movement, concept of workers' rights, etc., and importance of education, fair labor practices, and cooperation left the lasting legacy. Simple है तो उसने अच्छा काम किया, but this movement is going on in parallel to trade union movement. In 20s and 30s, what we have trade union on one hand, Owenism on the other hand. Both of them hit rock bottom by 30. दोनों एक जगह आकर रुक जाते, आगे नहीं जा पा रहे. Limitations दोनों की अपनी अपनी खामियां हैं. Owenism is too much idealistic and utopian, and trade union is too fragmented and too small and too much focusing on only skilled labor. They're not able to address all the problems, and they have to face opposition from the entire system of government and courts and employers. अब दोनों आगे रुक गए. अब आगे क्या होगा? So we have seen the first phase of Luddite, which was the primitive. Second phase of Blanketeers March, Peterloo massacre, वो भी suppress कर दिया गया. Then you have Owenism and early trade unionism, both of them also stumbled upon and they cannot go further. अब क्या होगा? Then what is the solution for the problem? Chartism. अब आएगा चार्टिस्ट मूवमेंट. लेट मी कम विद अ डिफरेंट डाटा. अल्टीमेटली सबका रूट क्या है? हमारे सीट्स, पॉलिटिकल पावर नहीं है हम. इफ वी गेट सीट्स इन पार्लियामेंट लाइक यू हैव गिवन टू मिडिल क्लास, तो हम अपने प्रॉब्लम खुद सॉल्व करेंगे. So you have a Chartist movement emerging in 30s and 40s. We have a very famous statement by Eric Hobsbawm. The Chartists were pioneers of democracy. They fought for the right of men to have a say in how they were governed. If you don't give us right to vote, then we cannot govern ourselves. So idea of popular sovereignty in real sense was the demand of Chartist movement. सबके पास वोट का अधिकार हो. It is a real democratic demand. उस समय British democracy, even after the Great Reform Act of 32, is actually बस 2% के 4% हो गए वोटर्स. So we have to see Chartist movement in detail. We'll stop here right now. Time भी हो गया. If you start, then मुझे I have to finish in हड़बड़ी, वो अच्छा नहीं रहेगा, है ना? I want to teach you a question important. You have to study this topic thoroughly. तो हम रुक जाते हैं यहाँ पे. If you have any doubt, any query, I can address that. Anish, Sudip, Mehboob. No, sir, no, sir, no, sir. Doubt, good. Doubt regarding German unification. In the role of Napoleon, we did not see invocation of historical greatness in case of German, unlike in Italy. But in case of cultural factor, we focused on past greatness. It seemed counterintuitive. Because Sudip, it's a good observation. In case of Italy, the Roman Empire was always there. It was the origin place where the first European Mediterranean Empire was formed. उनका greatness तो clear है. Secondly, with the beginning of Renaissance began in Italy. It created the reawakening, relearning of the ancient knowledge. So again, in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, you have the greatness of Italy being underlined again and again. तो इटली के बारे में ग्रेटनेस उनको भी पता था, सारी दुनिया को सबको मानते थे, उसमें कोई डाउट नहीं. रादर रोम एंड ग्रीस आर कंसीडर्ड एज द ओरिजिन ऑफ यूरोपियन सिविलाइजेशन. तो नेपोलियन ने कोई भी वहां जाता तो वो उनकी वाहवाही करता है. सो वहां पे तो है. इन केस ऑफ जर्मनी, Germans were relatively considered in medieval and ancient time as uncultured, uncouth, and their past civilization is not so civilized. They are more Berbers. These Germans are actually the ones who were North Germanic tribes who attacked the south, who destroyed partly the Roman Empire. So they were not known to be cultured. The Germans themselves said खुद को कि हम cultured थे, हमारा culture कुछ अलग था, वो अधिक authentic था, क्योंकि हर एक को अपना पास्ट का गुणगान गाना है. बट यूरोप में बाकी लोग उनको कल्चर शुरू में नहीं मानते थे. ठीक है, इज इट क्लियर? ठीक है, चलो, ओके. हाँ, टाटा.